They smelled beautiful because their bodies were never truly clean. Behind every elegant gown was a reality no one dared to whisper, a world where perfumes worked harder than water, and freshness was only an illusion. The deeper you look, the stranger it becomes, and the truth is nothing like the romantic image you've always imagined. Tonight, we step quietly into the scented shadows of Victorian women. So before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights. Adjust the pillow to fit your head. Maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere. And let's begin this journey together tonight. If one were to enter a Victorian household at the start of the day, before the bustle of chores and errands filled the rooms, the first impression would not be the elegance of the furnishings, or the neatness of the dresses laid out for wear. Instead, it would be the quiet effort to prepare a woman's appearance for a world that demanded she seem pure, controlled, and pleasantly scented at every moment. Long before she stepped outside the air, around her was expected to carry a carefully arranged fragrance, one strong enough to reassure others that she belonged to polite society, even when her body had not touched clean water for days. This pressure shaped her daily routine more profoundly than any rule of fashion or etiquette. Victorian women lived under an unspoken expectation that they must smell pleasant no matter what the realities of their daily lives were. Cleanliness was a luxury, not a standard. Most families lacked consistent access to heated water, clean tubs, or private bathrooms. Bathing required time, money, and fuel, three things that many households did not have in abundance. Anything resembling a full bath was reserved for rare days, and even then only after considerable effort. Women in the middle and lower classes made do with damp cloths and minimal washing, focusing on visible spots while leaving most of the body untouched. This limited routine did little to remove accumulated sweat, especially for those tightly wrapped in multiple layers of heavy fabric from morning until night. Corsets contributed to the problem. They trapped heat, reduced airflow, and forced the body to perspire more than usual. Underneath the elegant exterior, the skin was often damp, irritated, and warm. Skirts with petticoats and crinolines added even more insulation, creating a kind of enclosed chamber around the lower half of the body. These garments were essential to the ideal silhouette, yet they also made hygiene nearly impossible. Removing them required time and assistance, and reassembling the layers afterward was just as demanding. As a result, many women kept the same underlayers on for extended periods. Society insisted they look pristine, but gave them no realistic way to achieve actual cleanliness. In this environment, perfume became less an indulgence and more a necessity. It served as a mask, something applied over the body, not to enhance beauty but to conceal reality. The stronger the scent, the more reassuring it appeared to the people around them. A woman who smelled faintly of perspiration risked harsh judgment, whispered comments, and the assumption that she lacked discipline or moral character. Victorians held a contradictory belief that bodily odor was both natural and shameful, common among the poor, unacceptable among those who wished to be respected. Perfume stepped into this space as a substitute for proper hygiene, covering what could not be corrected. Bottles of fragrance sat on dressers, inside drawers, and even in small pouches carried discreetly during the day. Women reapplied scent the way others adjusted gloves or smoothed their hair. A quick touch to the wrist, a dab behind the ear, or a sprinkle onto clothing became ritualized actions. Over time, these gestures turned into a constant effort to maintain an illusion of freshness. Rooms filled with these fragrances before the women even left their houses. The scents clung to curtains, gloves, collars, and shawls. Rather than the subtle sweetness imagined today, Victorian perfumes were dense and penetrating, often made from ingredients designed to overpower rather than complement natural smell. The truth beneath these layers was rarely acknowledged. Women silently accepted that their bodies were not as clean as society pretended they were. They learned to endure the discomfort of clothing that trapped heat and absorbed sweat, all while being judged for any hint of odor that escaped. Their daily existence became a careful balancing act between concealing what was unavoidable and presenting what the world demanded. Perfume, in this sense, was a temporary solution for a permanent problem, a solution that did not resolve anything, but instead covered it just enough for them to move through the day without humiliation. The unfairness of these expectations was most visible among the working classes. Women who labored in kitchens, laundries, or workshops rarely had the opportunity to refresh themselves. Their work conditions were hot and dirty, Their clothing was reused many times before being washed, and their access to private space was nearly non-existent. Yet they too were expected to maintain a pleasant scent when appearing in public. The pressure did not lessen just because their circumstances were harsher. Instead, it intensified, as society was quick to attribute bodily odor to lack of virtue rather than lack of resources. Perfume became the cheapest and most immediate way to escape judgment. Even in families with better means, bathing was approached with caution. Some feared that water could weaken the nerves or disturb a woman's delicate constitution. Others rationed water for practical reasons, believing it should be conserved for cooking or laundry. Meanwhile, fragrances were promoted as objects of refinement. Advertisements claimed that a woman's scent reflected her status and character, turning perfume into both a symbol and a shield. Women purchased what they could afford not because they enjoyed the smell, but because they understood the consequences of lacking it. From the outside, Victorian society prided itself on strict morals, order, and discipline. But inside, homes behind the closed doors, where real bodies lived, real lives, the story was very different. Women struggled to meet impossible standards while lacking the basic tools for proper hygiene. They relied on perfume not out of vanity, but out of necessity. Their bodies were expected to smell clean even when they were discouraged or prevented from actually being clean. The polished fragrance that marked their presence was only a thin disguise for a life lived under pressure and constraint. Beneath that surface was a world shaped by discomfort, silence, and constant effort. And from within that world emerged truths far more uncomfortable than the scent they worked so hard to hide. The Victorian world carried strict expectations about how a woman should present herself. And among those expectations, scent held an unusually powerful place. Bodily odor was regarded not merely as unpleasant, but as a sign of something deeper and far more condemning. A woman who carried even the faintest natural scent risked being judged as morally lacking, careless, or inherently inferior. People believed that a proper woman should appear controlled in every visible and invisible way, and that included the smell her body released as she moved through crowded streets, carriages, or drawing rooms. This belief was rooted in the idea that odor reflected character. In a society obsessed with morality, discipline, and hierarchy, the human body was expected to behave as politely as its owner. Sweat, heat, or any trace of physical imperfection was seen as a failure to maintain the virtues associated with womanhood. To smell human was to appear weak. To smell unpleasant was to appear tainted. People rarely questioned whether women had access to hygiene or whether their clothing made cleanliness impractical. Instead, they assumed that scent, or the absence of it, revealed the truth about a woman's inner life. The pressure intensified in social environments where a woman's reputation could shift with a single whispered comment. Families feared shame, and daughters were taught to be vigilant about how they appeared among others. Mothers reminded their daughters to check their clothes, powder their skin, and apply perfume before greeting company. The unspoken rule was simple. No one should ever guess what the body beneath all the layers truly felt like. Even slight perspiration could lead to embarrassment, and a woman who failed to hide it might find herself excluded from gatherings or quietly judged by neighbors. This fear of judgment created a heavy silence around bodily odor. Women did not speak of it among themselves, and men rarely acknowledged it in public. Instead, the topic lived in the background as an unspoken threat. A misstep could follow a woman for years attached to her name, long after the event had faded. In crowded rooms, people exchanged discreet glances when they suspected someone had broken the invisible rule. The shame was immediate and harsh, but the cause was ignored. No one blamed the layers of wool, the heavy corsets, or the lack of washing facilities. They blamed the woman. Many women lived under the constant awareness that their bodies were judged more intensely than the bodies of men. A man who smelled of sweat was described as hard-working or vigorous. A woman who smelled the same was seen as improper and unrefined. This double standard forced women to battle their own physiology daily, even though their clothing trapped heat and encouraged perspiration far more than men's attire. They were expected to appear effortlessly clean without ever being given the means to achieve it. The contradiction extended into the household. Even in private spaces, women were expected to maintain a sense of purity. Bedrooms and parlors were arranged to suggest elegance and restraint, yet behind those well-swept surfaces lived the discomfort of bodies denied the chance to breathe. Many women slept in garments that restricted airflow. They woke with damp skin pressed against fabric, but their first concern each morning was not comfort. It was how to hide the evidence of their struggle before stepping outside. Scent became a form of social currency. A pleasant fragrance signaled control, refinement, and good upbringing. An unpleasant one suggested failure or moral weakness. For many women, this meant living in a perpetual state of vigilance. They monitored themselves, constantly afraid of sweat forming under their arms, across their backs, or along the tight seams of their corsets. Even mild warmth could cause panic. The anxiety was as real as the odor they feared. This societal expectation was harshest on women who worked long hours or lived in poorer neighborhoods. Laborers spent their days in hot kitchens, sewing rooms, and laundries, surrounded by steam and physical exertion. Yet when they entered public spaces, they were still expected to meet the same standard of fragrance as women who lived in comfort. Their efforts to hide odor were often desperate, requiring them to use cheap perfumes, powders, or makeshift methods. These solutions seldom worked for long, but without them, they would face judgment, and they could not escape. As the era progressed, etiquette manuals reinforced these expectations. Writers described the ideal woman as delicate and fragrant, emphasizing that her scent reflected her discipline and decorum. They warned that noticeable body odor could destroy a woman's social standing. These manuals rarely acknowledged the realities of daily life. Instead, they painted an impossible picture of purity, encouraging women to see their own natural scent as a personal failing. The message was clear: odor was shameful, and shame was feminine. This mindset shaped how women saw themselves and shaped how others treated them. Many grew accustomed to hiding discomfort and ignoring signs of poor health simply to maintain appearances. The fear of being judged for something as natural as sweating overshadowed the larger issue. Society refused to recognize that the expectations placed on women were both unrealistic and cruel. Rather than supporting better hygiene or improving living conditions, Victorians preferred to demand conformity and punish anyone who fell short. The insistence on purity created a surface of elegance that hid quiet struggles beneath it. Expectations grew stricter, even as daily realities remained unchanged. And within that widening gap, the true cost of maintaining a perfect scent began to reveal itself. Victorian households lived with a constant struggle over access to clean water, and this struggle shaped nearly every aspect of personal hygiene. Water sources were often polluted, carrying dirt waste and industrial runoff from nearby factories. Families drew water from communal pumps, shallow wells, or delivery carts that seldom guaranteed purity. Heating water required coal or wood, both of which were expensive and time-consuming to manage. For most families, the idea of bathing every day was not only unrealistic, but also considered unnecessary, even dangerous. Many believed that exposing the entire body to water too frequently could weaken the lungs, disturb circulation, or leave a person vulnerable to disease. Because of these fears and limitations, full baths were rare. Women were taught to avoid washing their entire bodies, unless absolutely needed, and such occasions did not come often. In many homes, setting up a bath involved hauling buckets of cold water, heating them over a stove, mixing them in a large tub, and ensuring the room stayed warm enough so the bather did not fall ill. For families with limited fuel, this process consumed resources they could not spare. Bathing was therefore planned, treated almost like a chore that required coordination among several household members. As a result, most women experienced a full bath only a few times each month. Instead of proper bathing, many relied on what they called dry cleaning. A damp cloth was used to wipe the face, neck, and hands, but the rest of the body was often untouched for days at a time. The cloth itself was sometimes dipped in scented water or lightly perfumed before use, creating the illusion of cleanliness without truly removing sweat or dirt. This routine offered only temporary relief. Heat trapped under corsets, petticoats, and heavy skirts returned quickly, building up moisture on the skin. Over time, these small attempts at hygiene did little to address the deeper discomfort women endured each day. The lack of clean water affected even the wealthier classes, though their circumstances were less severe. Some households had indoor plumbing, but the water remained inconsistent in quality. Even among those who could afford tubs and servants to prepare baths daily, bathing was viewed with skepticism. Doctors warned that sudden changes in temperature or prolonged exposure to water could disrupt a woman's delicate constitution. Families preferred to err on the side of caution, repeating old superstitions rather than adopting more frequent bathing practices. Women followed these beliefs because social norms reinforced them and because alternatives were rarely presented. For working women, the situation was more physically demanding. Long hours in kitchens, laundries, factories, or service roles left their bodies coated in sweat, smoke, and dust. Yet they returned home to the same limited means of cleaning themselves. A small basin, a damp cloth, and a few minutes before exhaustion overtook them. The difference between physical labor and the expectation of appearing refined created a painful contradiction. They were judged by the same standards as women who spent their days in parlors, though their circumstances made those standards impossible to meet. The consequences of infrequent bathing extended beyond discomfort. Skin irritation, rashes, and infections were common, especially in areas trapped beneath tight clothing. The layered garments of the era absorbed sweat repeatedly and were not washed every day. Many dresses required special handling, and undergarments were washed less often than needed because laundering them was labor-intensive. Women lived with the dampness of perspiration pressed against fabric that seldom dried fully. The combination of heat friction and unwashed garments created conditions ripe for odor, yet society blamed the individual rather than the circumstances. Homes themselves contributed to the problem. Coal fires filled rooms with soot, leaving residue on skin and hair. Streets were coated with dust and waste from horses, factories, and crowded markets. Simply moving through the city left a layer of grime that could not be removed without proper washing. But with water scarce and bathing discouraged, women adapted by covering themselves more completely and masking discomfort with perfume. The escalating reliance on scent was not a sign of indulgence. It was a response to the unavoidable reality of living in an environment that constantly dirtied them. Etiquette books rarely mentioned the challenges of bathing. Instead, they praised cleanliness as a moral virtue, while ignoring the lack of infrastructure needed to maintain it. Women were told to remain fresh, composed, and fragrant, without any acknowledgement of how difficult that was under daily conditions. This silence shaped a culture in which personal cleanliness became a secret struggle. Women blamed themselves for failing to be spotless, even as the society around them made it nearly impossible. The idea of bathing only a few times each month may seem extreme by modern standards, but within Victorian life, it was entirely ordinary. Even those who wished to bathe more often found themselves limited by cost, superstition, or lack of access. In this world, fragrance became more important than water. Scent served as the correction for everything that could not be washed away, and women used it because they had no other reliable option. Their bodies bore the weight of societal expectations, while lacking the resources needed to meet them. The absence of regular bathing shaped every effort women made to maintain an acceptable presence. Each day brought new discomforts that could only be managed, not resolved. Within that confined routine, perfumes slowly revealed why it became a desperate necessity rather than a luxury. Social expectations left women with little freedom in how they presented themselves, and scent became one of the most demanding parts of that presentation. No woman dared appear at a gathering without covering herself in multiple layers of fragrance strong enough to meet the unspoken rules of propriety. The idea of stepping into a ballroom, a parlor, or even a modest dinner without being thoroughly perfumed was unthinkable. A fading scent suggested negligence. A hint of natural odor suggested something worse. Women learned quickly that their place in society depended on controlling how they smelled, even when their bodies were trapped beneath clothing that made true cleanliness impossible. The garments themselves created conditions that made any attempt at freshness futile. Layer upon layer of heavy fabric wrapped around the body from waist to ankle, forming a closed chamber of heat. Beneath these layers, corsets pressed the torso tightly, reducing airflow and encouraging perspiration even during light activity. Petticoats and additional underlayers added more insulation, trapping warmth until it became a constant presence beneath the clothing. By midday, most women were already carrying hours of accumulated heat and moisture, yet they were expected to appear as if they had spent the morning in comfort and stillness. Because full baths were rare and undergarments were not washed daily odor, built steadily over time, the fabrics used in women's clothing absorbed sweat easily and released it slowly, if at all. Wool held scent deeply. Cotton trapped moisture. Silk clung to every trace of perspiration. Even on cool days, bodies encased in these materials were never truly free of lingering smell. By the time a woman prepared for an evening event, she knew her clothing had retained whatever the day had left behind. Removing and washing each layer was not practical, so she relied on perfume as the only immediate solution. Fragrance routines became almost ceremonial. Women applied scent in stages, starting with the skin and working outward. A stronger perfume was rubbed onto areas that produced the most heat: the neck, the chest, and the inner arms. Lighter scents were used on undergarments or pressed onto handkerchiefs that could be held discreetly in the palm. Gloves were sometimes perfumed so that every gesture carried a controlled aroma. Hair, too, was treated with scented oils or powders to counteract the smell that accumulated over days without washing. These actions were not expressions of luxury. They were forms of damage control. A woman who entered a warm, crowded room knew the air would turn dense quickly. Candle smoke, tight spacing, and the heat of conversation or dancing amplified every scent present. Without perfume applied heavily beforehand, her natural odor would surface within minutes. The fear of this moment dictated how women prepared for social life. Many reapplied fragrance quietly at the edge of a room or in a hallway when they felt the first sign of heat under their clothing. To hesitate was to risk judgment from peers who rarely forgave lapses. Women who lived modestly carried an even heavier burden. They did not have wardrobes filled with fresh garments or expensive perfumes with lasting effects. Instead, they worked with inexpensive mixtures that were often harsh, pungent, or overly sweet. But even these inferior scents were better than none. Their limited washing options made perfume their only buffer against humiliation. A single evening could determine their standing in church groups, neighborhood circles, or employment opportunities. They wore fragrance not to impress, but to survive socially. The contrast between public expectations and private reality grew more striking the closer one looked. Many households limited water use, rationing it carefully for cooking and cleaning rather than bathing. The idea of washing clothing after every wear was impossible. Laundries required labor, soap, fuel, and space many families lacked. Women slept in clothing that did not air out properly, and woke to garments still holding yesterday's heat. Yet when they stepped outside, they were judged not by effort, but by outcome. Perfume became the only way to bridge the gap between what society demanded and what their lives allowed. Etiquette guides reinforced this dependency. Writers instructed women on which scents were appropriate for morning visits, afternoon walks, and evening gatherings. They encouraged women to maintain a constant sweetness in their presence, suggesting that fragrance revealed refinement and discipline. What these guides failed to mention was that fragrance was often the only means women had to hide the consequences of limited hygiene. The silence around this truth placed a heavy psychological weight on them. Failing to smell pleasant was treated as a moral failure rather than a logistical impossibility. Men supported these expectations by evaluating women based on scent without understanding or caring about the conditions that shaped it. They applauded a woman who smelled delicately floral and criticized one who did not. Meanwhile, their own clothing allowed better airflow, and their social roles involved far less scrutiny of bodily odor. They demanded what they had never had to endure. This imbalance deepened the pressure on women to use perfume not as a choice but as a shield. As a result, fragrance no longer belonged to the realm of luxury or personal taste. It became a requirement woven into daily life, applied with the same seriousness as dressing properly or speaking politely. Women faced constant fear of being exposed for something they could not control, the natural scent of a human body confined beneath restrictive clothing. Perfume filled the space where hygiene practices should have existed, masking the truth long enough for women to navigate the day without attracting criticism. The more society pushed these expectations, the more perfume became tied to a sense of dignity. Behind every fragrant layer was a quiet acknowledgement that scent, not cleanliness, defined whether a woman would be respected or dismissed. Fragrance gained its heavy significance because daily life offered no real way to stay clean beneath the layers. Each outing demanded solutions that ignored the actual problem, and within this suffocating dependence, the true purpose of perfume began to emerge with unsettling clarity. The areas of the body most prone to holding odor became the center of a daily struggle for women who had little access to true cleanliness. The underarms, the back, and the sides of the neck absorbed heat and moisture throughout the day, trapped beneath layers of fabric that prevented even the slightest breath of air. These regions warmed quickly under corsets and high collars, turning every hour into an accumulation of sweat that could not evaporate. By the late afternoon, the skin beneath these tight structures held a dampness that no cloth or casual wipe could truly remove. Women lived in constant awareness of these danger zones, knowing that once odor took hold, no amount of composure could mask it. Modern deodorants did not exist, and women had no equivalent product to rely on. Powders helped only briefly. They absorbed moisture, but did nothing to address the scent caused by hours of perspiration trapped in confined spaces. Some women attempted to use starch, talc, or crushed herbs, but these homemade mixtures provided little relief in warm or crowded environments. Without a reliable way to stop odor at its source, the only option left was to overwhelm it. This was the purpose of perfume. It had to be strong enough to stand against the natural heat of the body and stay present through movement, exertion, and the rising warmth of evening gatherings. The act of applying perfume was deliberate and focused. Women targeted the areas where sweat collected most: the underarms, the inner chest, and the back beneath the corset's rigid lines. Though etiquette guides rarely admitted it directly, they suggested applying scent to places where warmth gathers. Everyone understood what that meant. These were parts of the body rarely spoken about openly, yet they demanded the most attention. Without treating these areas first, any fragrance applied to outer clothing would fade too quickly, allowing the reality beneath to surface. Many women rubbed perfume directly onto the skin, even though the alcohol and concentrated oils sometimes caused irritation, redness, or a burning sensation. Discomfort mattered less than avoiding social shame. The neck required its own routine. High collars and tight fabrics pressed constantly against the skin, trapping heat and preventing ventilation. Sweat forming at the base of the neck often sank into the stiff fabric, creating a damp ring that held odor long after it dried. To counter this, women dabbed perfume behind the ears, along the hairline, and across the sides of the neck. The goal was to place fragrance in places that would heat naturally throughout the day, ensuring the scent remained noticeable without requiring constant reapplication. The skin in these areas was especially delicate, but the pressure to smell pleasant left little room for gentler choices. The back was nearly impossible to clean properly between full baths. Most women could not reach the areas beneath the corset, especially the middle and lower back, which endured friction and heat throughout the day. Sweat pooled beneath the tightly bound fabric, soaking into the cotton or linen layers beneath the corset. By nightfall, these undergarments trapped the smell so deeply that even drying them by the hearth failed to remove it entirely. Perfume again became the only practical response. Women sprinkled scent along the edges of the corset before tightening it each morning, allowing the fragrance to soak into the cloth and release slowly throughout the day. This method did not remove the smell, it simply concealed it until evening. Despite these efforts, the results were imperfect. Even well-applied perfumes struggled to compete with hours of perspiration, especially during the summer months or in overcrowded venues. Ballrooms filled with bodies, candlelight, and rising temperatures made sweat inevitable. As the night progressed, the layered perfumes of different women mixed with underlying odors in the air, creating a thick atmosphere that was neither pleasant nor natural. Yet society preferred this heavy mixture over the alternative, acknowledging that the strict clothing and hygiene limitations made odor unavoidable. People accepted the layered scent as a normal part of social life, pretending the cause did not exist. Women with limited means faced even greater challenges. Their perfumes were cheaper, less stable, and often overwhelming. Some contained harsh chemical additives meant to prolong the scent, but ended up leaving a sharp, stinging aroma on the skin. These women applied fragrance just as heavily as their wealthier counterparts, but the results were less refined. Still, they had no choice. Without perfume, they faced criticism, rooted not in hygiene but in class. A woman who smelled strongly of sweat was seen as undisciplined, regardless of how hard she worked or how limited her resources were. The danger of relying on perfume extended beyond scent. Constant application left residue on skin and clothing mixing with sweat in ways that sometimes produced unpleasant combinations. Some perfumes oxidize under heat, turning sour or metallic, yet women continued applying them because failing to do so risked immediate judgment. They lived in a world where appearing fragrant mattered more than being comfortable or healthy. Perfume acted as a barrier between a woman and the social consequences of smelling human. Instruction manuals and fashion journals praised the strategic placement of scent, framing it as part of elegance rather than necessity. They avoided acknowledging the obvious: women applied perfume most heavily, where their bodies suffered the most from heat and confinement. These guides described fragrance as a moral choice, encouraging strong scents as markers of refinement. What they never mentioned was that these strong scents existed to compensate for the absence of practical hygiene. The silence around this truth created a burden women carried privately, never admitting the strain it caused. In reality, the layers of fragrance were not signs of indulgence. They were the only defense available to women trapped in a daily cycle of perspiration, discomfort, and impossible demands. The scents that filled parlors and ballrooms were not expressions of luxury. They were shields worn out of necessity by those who feared the consequences of being judged by the bodies they could not fully care for. Perfume became strongest in the exact places where the body suffered most from heat and confinement. Each attempt to mask the natural scent revealed how little control women truly had over their own comfort. Behind those concentrated layers of fragrance lay the growing imbalance between expectation and reality. Layers of clothing shaped a woman's daily experience long before she stepped into the public eye, forming a structure that limited movement, blocked airflow, and created ideal conditions for odor to accumulate. A typical day began with fastening the undergarments that sat closest to the skin, followed by the tightening of a corset that compressed the torso firmly. Petticoats were then added one by one, each bringing additional weight and insulation. A crinoline frame created the distinctive skirt shape, and finally, an outer dress completed the polished appearance expected by society. Beneath all of this lay a warm, confined space where air barely moved and perspiration had no place to escape. Corsets played a major role in trapping heat. Pulled tight to shape the waist and support the torso, they pressed linen directly against the skin from morning until night. This pressure restricted the circulation of air around the upper body, causing warmth to build steadily throughout the day. Sweat absorbed into the corset's lining remained against the skin, unable to evaporate. As hours passed, the dampness grew more noticeable, settling beneath the rigid structure where no ventilation could reach. Even a small amount of physical effort, walking a short distance, bending to pick something up, or managing household tasks, intensified the problem. Petticoats added another layer of confinement. Many women wore several to create the fullness required by fashion. These layers wrapped around the lower body like thick blankets, each trapping more heat. Fabric brushed against fabric with every movement, creating friction that increased perspiration. Air beneath the petticoats remained warm and still unable to circulate freely. Women described the sensation as carrying their own climate under their clothing, one that grew hotter and heavier as the day progressed. Even in cold weather, the internal space beneath the skirts often felt warm enough to cause discomfort. Crinolines, though functioning as cages that lifted skirts away from the legs, did not improve ventilation as much as one might expect. The frame allowed fabric to hang more freely, but it also formed a dome-like structure that held warm air close to the body. Heat rising from the legs collected beneath this curved shape, creating a pocket of trapped warmth. The combination of crinoline and multiple layers of fabric created an environment where odor could only move upward toward the torso rather than dissipate. This upward movement intensified the smell around the upper body and neck, where women were already struggling to maintain an appearance of freshness. Outer skirts sealed the internal environment even more tightly. Made from thick wool, dense cotton, or heavy silk, they acted as barriers that kept heat inside. These materials absorbed sweat slowly and released it even more slowly. Because outer garments were washed infrequently, they held onto the scent of everyday wear. Women might air them out overnight, but airing could not remove deep-seated odors trapped within the fibers. Over time, the garments developed a permanent scent that reflected long-term exposure to heat and perspiration. Air trapped within this layered system remained stagnant. Once odor formed, it stayed enclosed until the garments were removed completely, a task that required privacy and significant effort. During the day, the warmth beneath the skirts often rose toward the chest and neck, bringing the scent with it. Women felt this shift, constantly aware of how the internal environment responded to activity, weather, or prolonged standing. The smell, rising from beneath their clothing, became a private reminder of a problem they could not address in public spaces. Daily life intensified this issue further. Women working inside kitchens, laundries, shops, or factories experienced prolonged exposure to heat and physical exertion. The warmth generated by work, combined with the layers of clothing, made perspiration unavoidable. Yet these women were held to the same standards of fragrance as those who lived more comfortably. The demands of labor did nothing to reduce society's expectations. The combination of sweat, restrictive garments, and lack of proper bathing facilities left them vulnerable to judgment that overlooked their circumstances entirely. Laundry practices offered little relief. Undergarments were washed more often than outer layers, but even these did not dry completely in homes filled with coal smoke or damp weather. Partially dried garments held a sour scent that intensified when reworn. Outer skirts were washed so rarely that the odors became part of the fabric itself. Washing delicate materials required time, space, and resources that many families did not have. Women accepted this limitation because they had no choice, but they also knew it deepened the challenge of maintaining a socially acceptable scent. Perfume became the only weapon women had against this system of trapped heat and persistent odor. They applied fragrance heavily before leaving the house, hoping it would mask what the layers concealed. Many dabbed scent onto the edges of their corsets and the upper parts of their skirts, attempting to counteract the smell rising from beneath. Some used scented sachets tucked into pockets or placed between layers of clothing. These methods did not eliminate odor, they simply attempted to overpower it. Yet without them, women faced immediate scrutiny, as society refused to acknowledge the physical realities created by the clothing it demanded them to wear. The internal environment of these garments shaped not only how women smelled, but also how they felt. The constant heat caused fatigue, irritation, and discomfort. Yet women learned to hide their struggles and maintain composure. They moved gracefully despite feeling burdened by layers of fabric that worked against their bodies. They smiled through evenings while carrying the warmth of a day's accumulation beneath their skirts. Their scent became not a reflection of luxury, but a sign of their effort to meet expectations that ignored the physical consequences of fashion. Behind every elegant silhouette was a lived reality of restricted movement, trapped heat, and unavoidable odor. Society saw only the polished exterior, refusing to recognize the conditions beneath the surface. Layers of clothing created a sealed environment that made odor impossible to avoid. Each hour spent inside those garments deepened the divide between appearance and reality. Within that trapped warmth, the cost of looking refined grew heavier than most were willing to admit. Fragrance became a form of social currency long before a woman stepped into a ballroom. The strength of her scent signaled her standing, her refinement, and her understanding of unspoken rules that governed upper-class life. A heavily perfumed presence was not viewed as excess, but as evidence of discipline and cultivation. In many circles, a woman who did not carry a noticeable fragrance was quietly judged as careless, unpolished, or even morally lacking. Society made it clear that a pleasant scent was not a luxury, but an obligation, especially for those who wished to be seen as respectable. Social expectations turned perfume into a learned behavior. Women were taught from a young age to move, speak, and scent themselves in ways that aligned with ideals of purity and elegance. Managing fragrance required constant practice. They learned how much to apply, when to reapply, and where to place scent so it radiated at the right moments. A refined woman developed an instinct for masking what lay beneath the layers of her clothing. She knew how quickly perspiration could betray her, so she mastered the art of appearing fresh, even when her body felt anything but. In upper circles, fragrance was closely tied to status. Strong, lingering scents signaled that a woman could afford high-quality perfume luxuries made with costly oils and imported ingredients. The more noticeable the fragrance, the more confidently she could assert her position within the social hierarchy. A delicate scent might be pleasant, but it did not communicate wealth in the same way. The belief that stronger fragrance equaled higher refinement encouraged women to apply perfume more heavily than their bodies could comfortably tolerate. What mattered most was the impression left behind, not the comfort of the wearer. Behind these expectations lay a quieter truth. Heavy fragrance functioned as a shield, protecting women from accusations of uncleanliness. In a world where bathing was infrequent and clothing trapped heat relentlessly, odor became a constant threat. Even a hint of body scent could damage a woman's reputation instantly. Rumors spread easily, especially among those who competed for social attention. A faint smell of perspiration could lead to whispers about laziness or poor upbringing. The stakes were high because scent was used as a proxy for character. A fragrant woman was viewed as virtuous, while an odor-bearing woman was considered careless with herself and, by extension, morally questionable. This standard did not allow for nuance. Women were expected to smell pleasantly at all times, regardless of weather, activity, or health. Illness, stress, and long days of social obligations meant nothing. The scent she carried had to remain consistent, projecting calm control even when discomfort churned beneath her clothing. Maintaining this illusion became a daily struggle. Women applied perfume multiple times a day, sometimes carrying small bottles in their reticules so they could discreetly refresh their scent during outings. Fragrance mingled with powder sweat and the stale air trapped beneath their dresses, forming a layered aroma that society accepted as the hallmark of refinement. In this environment, learning how to hide odor became as essential as learning how to converse politely. Women practiced subtle techniques in front of mirrors, and during private moments, they dabbed perfume onto handkerchiefs, tucked inside their sleeves, ensuring a pleasant aroma released with every gesture. They scented gloves, so that greeting someone with a handshake conveyed refinement before a word was spoken. They placed fragrance near the neckline, so that leaning in for polite conversation gave a gentle impression of cleanliness and composure. The pressure to uphold this fragrant facade shaped daily routines. Before attending any gathering, women undertook a careful preparation process. They checked the condition of their clothing, freshened the areas most prone to odor, and layered scent strategically. Even then, many were never fully confident. Warm rooms, candlelit dinners, and crowded halls created environments where perfume had to work harder than ever. Women lived in constant awareness of the heat rising beneath their garments, hoping their preparations would last through the evening. Those who failed to meet this standard often faced harsh judgment. A woman whose perfume was too faint might be dismissed as inexperienced or lacking social refinement. A woman who smelled of sweat could become the subject of lasting embarrassment. The expectation of constant fragrance left no room for natural human variation. Women lived under the watchful eyes of a society that pretended bodily functions did not exist, even as it demanded impossible levels of control over them. The cruelty of this system lay in its silent operation. Society did not openly discuss odor or the challenges women faced. Instead, expectations were conveyed through etiquette, books, gossip, and the subtle but unmistakable reactions of others. A slight pullback of the head, a changed expression, or a quiet remark could devastate a reputation. Women became experts at reading these social cues, adjusting their fragrance habits accordingly. The demand to remain scented at all times became an unspoken burden, carried with careful precision. In truth, the fragrant woman was not indulging in decadence. She was protecting herself. Fragrance became armor, a shield against accusations, against judgment, against the consequences of living in clothing designed to trap sweat and heat. To appear unscented was to risk being perceived as uncultured or unworthy of the company she kept. For those in elite social circles, smelling pleasant was as essential as speaking politely or dressing elegantly. Without it, acceptance became uncertain. This pressure shaped how women navigated every aspect of their lives. Scent became inseparable from identity. A woman's fragrance could precede her entrance, linger after her departure, and speak for her when words were unnecessary. Yet the meaning behind that scent was rarely acknowledged. It was not simply a matter of beauty or romance. It was survival within a social framework that allowed no softness, no failure, and no acknowledgement of human limits. A fragrant presence became the only acceptable mask for bodies struggling beneath layers of fabric and expectation. Each carefully placed scent exposed the effort behind maintaining an image society demanded without sympathy. Behind that polished silence, the strain of appearing refined waited to spill into the next truth. Behind every polished appearance, a woman carried a body that rarely encountered real cleanliness. Daily life operated under strict beliefs that discouraged frequent bathing, especially for those who followed the ideals of respectability and modesty. Water was not trusted as a harmless element. Many believed it could weaken the body, disrupt a woman's delicate balance, or expose her to illness. These beliefs shaped not only hygiene but also identity. Women were encouraged to avoid full immersion in water and rely instead on minimal surface cleaning that barely touched the demands of a body wrapped in heavy, suffocating clothing. Long stretches passed without true contact with water. Instead of bathing, most women wiped their skin with damp cloths, focusing on areas that could be reached easily without undressing fully. This process took only minutes and removed little beyond surface dirt. Perspiration trapped under layers of garments left traces that no simple cloth could lift. Skin carried the warmth and residue of days lived in environments shaped by fabric rather than comfort. Despite this, women were told such routines were adequate, even healthy, and that avoiding full bathing protected them from weakness. Beliefs about water went far beyond superstition. They were woven into medicine etiquette and household expectations. Many doctors promoted the idea that cold water endangered the heart or lungs, while hot water weakened the nerves. Women viewed through a narrow lens of fragility were particularly discouraged from bathing during times of fatigue, stress, or menstruation. As a result, many went weeks without immersing themselves completely in water. Even when they felt the discomfort of their skin, they hesitated. Social pressure was stronger than personal discomfort, and women followed the norms that defined their position. Fragrance filled the space left by the absence of cleanliness. It became the substitute for bathing, the socially acceptable method of addressing a body that could not be regularly washed. Women learned to coat their skin with perfumes that masked the buildup of odor caused by sweat and limited hygiene. These scents replaced water in their daily routines. Perfume on the neck, perfume on the wrists, perfume under the arms, perfume along the chest. Each application layered itself onto skin that had not been cleaned thoroughly. Day after day, the scent deepened, not because women desired extravagance, but because they had no other choice. Clothing played a significant role in worsening the problem. Garments layered tightly against the skin made perspiration constant. With little chance to ventilate or dry properly, the dampness settled deep into the pores and folds of the body. Women felt this accumulation each evening when they loosened their corsets and removed their outer layers. The warmth trapped beneath their clothing met the cool air of the room, releasing a reminder of hours spent in constrained heat. Without proper washing, this cycle repeated endlessly, layering scent over scent on a body that struggled to breathe beneath fabric. Social expectations demanded silence about these realities. Women were taught to present themselves as polished, composed, and untouched by the inconveniences of physical existence. Acknowledging their struggle with odor or cleanliness was unthinkable. The culture valued modesty so highly that even discussing the need for bathing felt improper. As a result, women accepted an uncomfortable truth. They had to smell pleasant, even when their bodies did not feel clean. Society wanted the aroma of purity, not the presence of actual hygiene. The idea that avoiding water preserved health shaped how women interpreted their own discomfort. Some believed the heaviness and irritation on their skin were signs that water would have made them even weaker. Others feared catching chills or exposing themselves to unseen dangers. Personal unease was dismissed in favor of beliefs passed down through families, reinforced by doctors, and repeated in etiquette guides. Even when a woman sensed she needed a proper bath, she often waited until circumstances allowed it, or until discomfort became too overwhelming to ignore. The conflict between internal discomfort and external expectations created a quiet strain. Women felt the weight of their own skin becoming unfamiliar over days without true washing. They sensed the build-up beneath their clothing, but pushed the awareness away, focusing instead on maintaining the appearances demanded of them. Water was something to approach cautiously, sometimes even fearfully, and fragrance became the only acceptable solution for masking the truth beneath the surface. Society reinforced the belief that a pleasant scent proved discipline. A fragrant woman was viewed as refined, while an unscented one risked criticism. This pressure turned fragrance into a tool of survival. Women coated themselves with perfumes not because they sought indulgence, but because they faced judgment at every gathering if they failed to smell appropriately sweet. The heavier the scent, the more thoroughly it concealed the fact that the body beneath had not met water for days. In this system, women lived with contradictions. They were expected to embody purity and cleanliness, while simultaneously being discouraged from using the most basic form of hygiene. The result was a quiet dissonance between appearance and reality. Bodies carried the residue of daily life pressed beneath layers of fabric and shielded by beliefs that kept water at a distance. Meanwhile, society continued to admire the polished fragrance that masked everything beneath it. The distance between a woman's public scent and her private reality widened each day. Clothing trapped, heat beliefs discouraged, bathing and fragrance filled the role water should have played. Women survived this contradiction through routine endurance and silence. Those who lived closest to these expectations understood that the scent others admired came from necessity, not pleasure. A body kept from water accumulated marks that perfume could only soften, never remove. Each layer of fragrance displayed the quiet conflict between expectation and the limits of daily life. At the edge of that strained balance waited another method women used to stay presentable without ever being clean. Dry cleaning of the body became an accepted routine for women who lived under the restrictions of limited bathing and constant expectations of fragrance. Each morning began with quiet rituals designed to maintain the appearance of freshness without truly cleansing the skin. A soft cloth, lightly dampened with a mixture of water and perfume, was used to wipe the surface of the body. The cloth touched the neck, the chest, the underarms, and the areas where heat gathered most intensely beneath clothing. These gestures created a thin layer of fragrance on the skin, giving the illusion of cleanliness, even though they removed little of the sweat that had accumulated the day before. The scented cloth served as a substitute for bathing, a compromise between the desire to feel clean and the belief that water should be avoided. A light wipe left behind a faint coolness and a burst of fragrance, but it did little to address the odor that had settled deeper into the pores and folds of the skin. Women repeated this routine because it was familiar, socially accepted, and encouraged by advice manuals. It allowed them to prepare themselves without undressing fully, without confronting the reality of the trapped heat and residue beneath their layers. The cloth became a tool of maintenance rather than transformation. Powder added the next layer of this routine. Fine pale powders, made from starch, rice flour, or perfumed talc, were dusted across areas where odor might emerge throughout the day. The powder provided a quick illusion of dryness and softness. It absorbed some surface moisture, preventing immediate discomfort, and its fragrance helped mask the first signs of odor. Women dabbed it under their arms, between the breasts, along the neck, and sometimes along the inner thighs. Each application felt like a small barrier being placed between themselves and the expectations of a society that demanded constant composure. Over time, though, these layers of powder began to accumulate. Without real washing, the powder mixed with perspiration, forming a paste-like residue that clung to the skin. The more a woman powdered herself, the heavier and more uncomfortable the layer became. As hours passed, the powder absorbed new sweat, losing its light fragrance and revealing the smell it was meant to hide. Women recognized this shift, but had limited options. Removing the residue requires water or a full scrubbing actions many avoid, especially when preparing for social gatherings. They simply applied more powder, hoping the renewed fragrance would carry them through the day. The scented cloth returned in the evening or before outings. Women wiped the same areas repeatedly to refresh the fragrance, while avoiding the difficulty of undressing and washing properly. This cycle left the body coated with alternating layers of perfume and powder, creating a surface that smelled sweet initially, but eventually grew stale. Skin began to feel tight or irritated, especially in areas where powder collected beneath clothing. Yet women endured this discomfort, quietly believing it was less troublesome than the risks associated with full bathing. The conflict between appearance and bodily sensation became clearer with each passing day. Women felt the residue beneath their clothing, sensed the friction of powder mixed with sweat, and noticed the faint sourness that rose through the fragrance by evening. Still, they continued with the process. Maintaining appearances mattered more than acknowledging physical discomfort. Social expectations remained firm. A woman was to smell pleasant, remain composed, and conceal any signs of natural odor. The rituals of dry cleaning allowed her to uphold these standards without challenging the beliefs that discouraged proper hygiene. For many women, the dry cleaning routine extended beyond the body to their clothing. Undergarments were sprinkled with powder or dabbed with scent, softening the smell of perspiration that clung to them. Some women placed sachets filled with dried flowers between their layers of clothing, hoping the faint floral aroma would linger as they moved. These attempts created a cloud of mixed fragrances that followed them throughout the day. To outsiders, the scent signaled refinement. To the women themselves, it signaled compromise. Despite the heavy use of perfume and powder, odor eventually found its way through the layers. Heat trapped beneath, clothing intensified even the mildest scent, pushing it upward. Women noticed this most clearly when they removed their corsets or loosened their garments at day's end. The fragrance that had felt strong in the morning weakened against the realities of a body that had perspired under layers of fabric and powder. No amount of wiping or dusting could fully remove what lingered beneath. Some accepted this quietly. Others attempted to compensate by applying more fragrance, beginning the cycle anew. These practices shaped how women navigated their days. They learned to move slowly, to avoid exertion when possible, and to minimize situations that exposed them to heat. They relied on controlled gestures and careful posture to keep their garments in place and their scents stable. Even so, the tension between maintaining appearances and managing bodily needs remained constant. Each morning's preparation was a negotiation between what was possible and what was expected, between what could be masked and what could not be erased. The combination of scented cloths and powdered skin created an outward impression of grace, even as it concealed the discomfort beneath. Women used these methods because they allowed them to function within the rigid boundaries set by society. They were not indulgent habits, but practical solutions to challenges rarely acknowledged openly. Each day renewed the cycle of wiping, powdering, dressing, and hoping the scent would hold long enough to avoid scrutiny. A surface cleaned without water carried the weight of residue that scent could never fully hide. Each added layer, meant to preserve freshness, exposed how fragile these routines truly were. Beyond this fragile balance lay another method. Women used to keep odor contained inside their clothing. Scents were arranged in layers just as clothing was arranged in layers, forming a system designed to control odor through carefully planned fragrance placement. Women developed a routine that matched the structure of their garments: light scents closest to the skin, floral scents between the skirts, and heavier animalic notes on the outermost fabric. Each tier was meant to perform a specific role in masking the accumulation of perspiration that rose throughout the day. This approach became an accepted strategy, refined through trial repetition and the pressure to maintain a consistently pleasant presence. The innermost layer received the softest fragrance. A gentle scent was applied to the chemise, or the thin linen undergarment that rested directly against the skin. This fragrance was chosen to be mild because it interacts most directly with body heat. Strong scents applied here could become overwhelming, turning sharp or sour as they mixed with perspiration trapped beneath the corset. Women dabbed light notes, typically lavender, citrus, or delicate herbal blends along the neckline and sides. The goal was to build a base layer of scent that softened the natural odor rising from the skin without drawing attention to itself. The middle layer carried a floral fragrance. This tier included petticoats, crinolines, or inner skirts that formed the foundation of the outer dress. These fabrics rarely touched the skin directly, allowing women to use more vibrant scents without worrying about harsh chemical reactions on the body. Floral fragrances such as rose violet or jasmine were common choices. Women sprinkled diluted perfume onto the inner skirts or applied perfumed sachets between the layers. As the day progressed and the heat beneath these garments intensified, the floral notes were meant to bloom, gently rising upward in a controlled way. The outermost layer bore the strongest fragrance. This included the visible skirt and the bodice that framed the upper body. Heavy scents, often containing musk, amber, or civet, were applied here. These animalic notes had the strength to withstand the dust, wind, and odors of the street. More importantly, they helped mask the complex mixture of smells that already accumulated beneath the layers. The outer scent acted as a shield, meeting the world, before the more vulnerable fragrances beneath had the chance to escape. Women refreshed this layer frequently, especially before social gatherings, recognizing how quickly external conditions could weaken it. Each layer of fragrance worked together in theory. Women hoped that the rising odor from sweat trapped beneath the clothing would be intercepted by the inner scent, softened by the floral middle layers, and finally cloaked entirely by the strong outer scent. It was a strategy of containment more than purification. Every scent contributed to preserving an illusion of freshness, even when the body beneath felt coated in perspiration. Women learned how these combinations interacted over time, adjusting the balance as needed to achieve the appearance of refinement. In practice, this layered system produced complicated results. Heat built throughout the day, intensifying the fragrances and blending them into an unpredictable mixture. The mild inner notes mingled with the floral middle and the musky outer scents, forming a dense aroma that shifted with movement and temperature. Instead of creating a harmonious sequence, the scents often collided. The complexity of the mixture became its own identity, a scent associated with upper-class women who wore elaborate clothing and lacked proper access to bathing. To many, this blended smell became recognizable, neither fully floral nor fully musky sweet in places, and sour in others, unmistakably tied to the daily life of women whose bodies remained concealed beneath layers. The layered fragrance system did not stop the odor from rising. It only altered its character. The natural scent of perspiration found its way through the cloth, carrying traces of warmth that no amount of perfume could completely erase. Women relied on the performance of the scents, trusting that the complexity projected a sense of deliberate elegance rather than improvised concealment. The stronger the combined aroma, the more confidently it signaled wealth, status, and discipline. The world interpreted the mixture as refinement, even though it was built on a foundation of discomfort and necessity. Maintaining these layers required constant attention. Women reapplied perfume before leaving home after arriving at gatherings and between social activities. Handkerchiefs soaked lightly in scent were kept on hand to press discreetly against areas where fragrance had faded. Even small actions, walking upstairs, navigating crowded rooms, or sitting for extended periods, shifted the internal temperature of the garments, prompting women to refresh the outer scent to maintain the structure of the layered system. Fragrance became a daily practice cultivated with the same care as managing posture or choosing the correct etiquette. This complex layering shaped the relationship women had with their own bodies. They understood scent not as an expression of beauty, but as a method of survival within social expectations. Each layer of fragrance compensated for the absence of ventilation and the scarcity of proper hygiene. The system reflected the strain placed on women to remain fragrant at all times, regardless of weather or circumstance. It also revealed how deeply society valued appearance over comfort, demanding that women conceal the realities of their lived experience beneath orchestrated layers of scent. The resulting aroma, dense, unmistakable, and composed of competing notes, stood as a signature of the era's expectations. People grew accustomed to it, accepting it as a normal feature of gatherings attended by women in elaborate dress. What many interpreted as sophistication was, in truth, a carefully constructed mask built from the limitations imposed on women's bodies. Multiple layers of scent built a fragile shield over the heat and discomfort held beneath heavy garments. Each attempt to organize fragrance into neat tiers revealed how little control women truly had over rising odor. Another hidden set of practices soon emerged from this struggle, shaping how scent clung to every part of their attire. Hair, gloves, and hats became essential tools in managing scent, each holding a specific role in the effort to project refinement while concealing the realities beneath. These items absorbed fragrance easily and released it slowly throughout the day, making them valuable extensions of the body's carefully controlled aroma. Women learned to treat these accessories as additional surfaces on which to build the illusion of cleanliness, using them to extend the reach of perfume far beyond the limits of their skin. In a world where bathing was infrequent and clothing trapped odor relentlessly, these outward pieces became quiet partners in maintaining appearances. Hair absorbed scent more readily than any fabric. Women who rarely washed their hair relied on perfume to manage their natural oil and the odor that developed over days or weeks. Washing hair was considered risky. Many believed it weakened the scalp or invited illness. As a result, hair was cleaned far less frequently than clothing, sometimes only a few times each month. To maintain the appearance of freshness, women sprayed or dabbed perfume directly onto their curls or braids. The fragrance settled into the strands, releasing its aroma whenever the air shifted or when a woman turned her head. This practice softened the natural scent of unwashed hair, though it did not eliminate the heaviness that gradually built along the scalp. Despite its utility, perfumed hair carried its own challenges. The oils and powders women used for styling mixed with sweat trapped beneath bonnets or hats. Over time, the combination created a scent that blended sweetness with the unmistakable warmth of accumulated days. Women recognized this complexity but had few alternatives. They added more perfume, brushed the hair gently to distribute the scent, and hoped the mixture projected sophistication rather than fatigue. Hair thus became both a carrier of fragrance and a reminder of the limited access women had to true cleanliness. Gloves played a subtler but equally important role. Made from leather that absorbed moisture easily, gloves trapped sweat from the hands as women navigated daily life. Hands touched door handles, market goods, furniture, and countless surfaces that carried their own odors. Leather soaked up these scents and held them long after the moment passed. To counter this, women seasoned their gloves with perfume. They rubbed scented oils onto the leather or sprayed the inside lightly before wearing them. As the gloves warmed against the skin, the fragrance emerged, slowly masking both the smell of the leather and the traces of daily contact. Gloves became symbols of refinement, partly because of this scented function. When a woman greeted someone, the faint aroma rising from her gloves communicated care and discipline. A well-scented glove suggested a woman who understood the expectations of upper-class behavior. Yet beneath the polished scent lay the reality of damp fingers and absorbed sweat that could not be washed away easily. Leather gloves, unlike cloth, were rarely cleaned thoroughly. They held on to the history of each wear, mixing perfumes with the imprint of the body in ways that both concealed and preserved odor. Hats offered another surface for fragrance. Positioned near the face and hair, hats played an influential role in shaping a woman's scent profile as she entered a room. Many women applied perfume to the ribbon lining or brim of their hats, believing this made the fragrance more noticeable during greetings and conversations. Because hats were often the first piece of clothing removed upon arrival at an event, their scent acted as a kind of introduction, signaling refinement before a woman spoke. Society interpreted a beautifully scented hat as a sign of good upbringing, even though the practice primarily masked the odor rising from unwashed hair beneath. These accessories worked together to maintain the illusion of freshness in environments that constantly challenged it. Each piece carried its own mixture of perfume, sweat, and the smells of daily life. As women moved through crowded streets, warm parlors, or candle-lit gatherings, the scents shifted and mingled. The fragrance from hair blended with the aroma rising from gloves, while the perfume on hats added another note to the ensemble. The result was a layered scent profile that reflected both effort and necessity. Despite their function, these items revealed the limitations of the fragrance-based approach. No matter how much perfume was applied, odors from unwashed hair or worn gloves eventually broke through. Accessories absorbed scent unevenly, and over time they developed their own distinct smell, part perfume, part material, part residue of the body. Women recognized when their gloves felt heavy with absorbed sweat, or when their hair carried days-old fragrance mixed with scalp oil. Still, they continued using these items as tools of concealment, knowing that without them maintaining social expectations would be far more difficult. These practices shaped daily routines and influenced how women perceived their own bodies. Hair became something to perfume rather than wash. Gloves became objects to scent rather than clean. Hats became vessels for fragrance rather than functional coverings. Each item, though outwardly elegant, participated in the ongoing battle between odor and appearance, offering temporary solutions to problems rooted in deeper constraints. The pressure to remain fragrant turned every accessory into a contributor to the illusion of refinement. Women scented what they could not cleanse, masked what they could not change, and relied on the slow release of fragrance from these objects to carry them through the demands of the day. Accessories soaked in fragrance created a polished surface that hid the strain beneath their elegance. Each scented layer reflected the quiet effort required to maintain an image shaped by impossible expectations. More unsettling practices soon surfaced, reshaping how perfume interacted with the body and the garments closest to it. Strong fragrance often carried a meaning that few dared to acknowledge openly. When a woman entered a room wrapped in dense, layered scent, it signaled not excess or vanity, but necessity. Perfume did not cleanse her body. It only obscured what lay beneath. In a life constrained by limited bathing, heavy clothing, and constant heat, the body accumulated more than anyone wished to admit. Sweat settled into layers of fabric, clung to hair, and soaked into gloves and collars. Perfume became the screen that stood between a woman and the scrutiny of others, a barrier made from scent rather than cleanliness. People learned to interpret strong fragrance as a signature of refinement, yet the truth was more complicated. A complex scent, one that blended florals, spices, musk, and powder, often did more work than lighter fragrances could accomplish. It attempted to counter not one odor, but several. The sourness of sweat trapped beneath corsets, the musty warmth of fabric worn for days, the residue of powders mixed with oil on the skin, and the faint heaviness that lingered in unwashed hair. Each layer of fragrance interacted with these hidden smells, sometimes softening them, sometimes only reshaping them into something tolerable. The resulting blend became a recognizable marker of a woman navigating a world that demanded purity without granting the means to achieve it. Women understood this system intuitively. They knew that subtle scents could not withstand the demands of long evenings in crowded ballrooms, or the heat trapped inside their tightly structured garments. The stronger the perfume, the more confidently they could stand among others without fear of embarrassment. They selected perfumes not for pleasure, but for reliability. Musk-based scents, amber-heavy blends, and complex floral mixtures were favored because they held their form even when body heat intensified. These fragrances were chosen for performance, not delicacy. Men, though, rarely included in conversations about hygiene, noticed these dynamics more than they admitted. Many accepted the layered aroma surrounding women as part of everyday life, understanding silently what the scent concealed. Politeness kept them from acknowledging it aloud, but awareness lingered. A sharp note of musk, a heavy burst of floral warmth, or a faint sourness beneath sweetness often revealed more than a woman intended. Still, social norms demanded silence. Women worked to maintain composure, and men pretended not to notice the effort behind the fragrance. The expectation to remain fragrant at all times placed pressure on women that extended beyond hygiene. Fragrance became part of social etiquette, reinforcing the idea that a well-scented woman was disciplined, cultured, and aware of her responsibilities. Those whose scent faded during the day risked appearing careless or unprepared. Even minor lapses could lead to whispered judgments. A woman could feel the shift herself when warmth rose beneath her clothing, or when fragrance on her neckline weakened. These moments created a quiet anxiety that shadowed every movement, every interaction, every gathering. Strong scent also highlighted how little control women had over their own bodies. They were forced to manage odor without addressing its cause, relying on fragrance to battle conditions created by clothing beliefs about bathing and social constraints. The more complex the fragrance, the more obvious the underlying struggle became. Scent had to work harder each day, stretching itself across gaps that proper hygiene could have filled. But since genuine cleanliness remained rare and sometimes discouraged, women accepted perfume as the only means of maintaining their place in society. Perfume also carried symbolic meaning. To outsiders, it represented grace and elegance. To the women who applied it, it represented survival within a rigid system. They coated their skin, hair, and clothing because failing to do so risked being read as negligent or unworthy. The pressure to meet these expectations quietly shaped how women moved, how they prepared themselves, and how they interpreted their reflection in the mirror. The fragrance they carried became both shield and burden. The complexity of these scents revealed the body's reality, despite attempts to hide it. Rising heat altered perfume in unpredictable ways, causing notes to shift or deepen. Floral scents could turn overly sweet, musk could sharpen, and powdery notes could mix with stale air trapped beneath clothing. These transformations created a layered aroma that hinted at the effort needed to maintain refinement. People recognized this blended scent without questioning its origins, treating it like a signature of feminine presence rather than a symptom of restricted hygiene. Even so, women continued refining their approach. They applied perfume strategically, layering it on specific points of the body and clothing. They refreshed it at intervals, carrying small bottles discreetly in their bags. They learned which scents held longest, which ones softened as they warmed, and which combinations offered the best chance of concealing the odor rising from beneath heavy garments. Their knowledge was practical, shaped by necessity rather than indulgence. Strong fragrance did not arise from vanity. It arose from limitation. Women were forced to rely on scents. Their bodies were trapped in layers of fabric that prevented ventilation because they were discouraged from bathing and because society judged any trace of natural odor as a moral failure. The stronger the fragrance, the more desperately it worked to cover a truth that women had no power to escape. Dense fragrance acted as the final barrier between a woman and the scrutiny of those around her. Each heavy note revealed how deeply she struggled with what her body endured beneath its clothing. Amid this quiet conflict, women soon adopted even more demanding routines to maintain the illusion of purity. Servants played a quiet but essential role in sustaining the illusion of freshness that society demanded from their mistresses. Each morning began with a ritual that stretched far beyond the simple task of dressing. A maid entered the room, carrying bottles of perfume, jars of powders, scented cloths, and freshly brushed garments that had been aired overnight. She understood that her responsibility extended beyond appearance. Her job was to create a fragrant barrier thick enough to withstand hours spent inside heavy clothing. The success of the woman she served depended on how well this invisible armor was prepared. The process started with lifting away the garments worn the night before, pieces that still held traces of sweat, perfume, and the stale warmth trapped throughout the previous day. The maid inspected each layer for scent, checking the undergarments, corset linings, and sleeves that sat closest to the skin. Though she could smell what lingered, she said nothing. Speaking openly about odor was unthinkable. Instead, she aired the garments quietly by an open window or near a small fire, knowing it would reduce the heaviness without removing it entirely. Perfuming the body began before a single layer of clothing was put on. The maid used a lightly scented cloth to wipe the neck, chest, and underarms of her mistress, spreading a thin veil of fragrance that acted as the foundation for everything that followed. She worked with practiced movements, lifting the hair gently, brushing aside fabric, and applying perfume in places that would grow warm first. These early touches were essential as they set the tone for the entire day. Without them, the fragrances layered onto the clothing would not be enough to mask the odor that rose from the skin. Next came powders. The maid dusted the torso lightly, paying attention to the areas where sweat gathered most visibly. She understood how powder behaved under heat, how quickly it clung to moisture, how it mixed with oils on the skin. Too much powder would turn pasty beneath the corset. Too little would allow odor to break through before midday. Her skill lay in navigating this delicate balance without drawing attention to the fact that it was necessary. She applied each layer as though it were a simple cosmetic step, concealing the truth behind gestures that appeared routine. When the corset was tightened, the maid paused. This garment would trap warmth immediately, and she knew that once it was fastened, reaching the skin beneath would be impossible for the rest of the day. She dabbed fragrance along the edges where the corset met the chemise, hoping the scent would rise slowly as the body heated. Many maids developed their own techniques. Some scented the laces, others perfumed the stays, or rubbed fragrant oils into the seams. Their innovations were rarely acknowledged, but they shaped how their mistresses were perceived in public. The fragrant dressing ritual continued with each additional layer. The maid applied floral scents to petticoats and inner skirts, pressing them gently into the fabric with her hands. She understood which notes circulated upward with movement and which remained embedded in the cloth. The outer dress received the strongest scent, with musk or amber placed strategically along the hem cuffs or bodice. These areas were chosen not only for their visibility, but for their ability to catch air as the wearer walked. A well-scented dress created a soft cloud around its owner, masking whatever warmth and odor rose from beneath. This entire process could take an hour or more, especially on days when the mistress prepared for a social visit or evening event. The maid worked without comment, knowing that fragrance was the closest her mistress would come to cleanliness on most days. The taboo around bathing meant that even when odor was unmistakably present, the maid could not suggest a wash. The hierarchy of the household made such a remark unthinkable. Her responsibility was to conceal, not correct. Reapplication was part of the role as well. Before the mistress left home, the maid added further scent to gloves, hats, and hair. She perfumed the ribbons of bonnets, the lining of sleeves, and the tips of handkerchiefs tucked discreetly into pockets. These details mattered. When the mistress greeted someone, these scents helped define her presence. A hint of perfume released from the glove during a handshake or a gentle note rising from the brim of a hat when it was lifted reinforced the impression of refinement. The maid ensured that every piece of clothing carried its own fragrance, creating a layered scent profile that lasted throughout the day. Despite the elegance of these rituals, the truth beneath them was plain to the maid. She witnessed firsthand how the body struggled under layers of clothing that allowed no ventilation. She understood how fragrance mixed with sweat, how powder collected in the folds of the skin, and how quickly a pleasant scent could sour under heat. Yet she remained silent, performing her role with precision, because silence was expected. Her work ensured that her mistress remained safe from social judgment, even as she concealed the physical evidence of limited hygiene. These rituals highlighted the divide between appearance and reality. A maid's hands shaped the fragrance that defined her mistress's identity, masking what society refused to acknowledge openly. Through scent, she created a boundary between public admiration and private discomfort. Her work was invisible, yet it held tremendous power. Without her careful labor, the illusion of refinement could collapse in an instant. Women depended on these rituals because the alternative bathing was discouraged, inconvenient, and often impossible. Servants understood this better than anyone. They accepted their role in maintaining the outward image of cleanliness, even though they knew that scent alone could not erase the truth beneath the garments. Servants constructed the fragrant surface that protected women from judgment they could never speak aloud. Each step of the ritual exposed how deeply fragrance replaced the comfort of true cleanliness. Further routines soon revealed how tightly society clung to scent as a substitute for the hygiene it distrusted. Clothing carried its own history long before it ever touched the skin each morning. Dresses, corsets, and petticoats gathered layers of scent, sweat, and dust that settled deep into the fibers, forming a residue that perfume could mask but never remove. Washing these garments was rare, complicated by the delicate fabrics, stiff construction, and social beliefs about what water might do to a woman's health. Instead, clothing was allowed to absorb day after day of bodily heat, holding it quietly beneath the careful structure of ribbons and stays. These pieces became familiar companions, shaped by repetition and routine rather than freshness. The corset sitting closest to the body collected the most persistent scent. It absorbed sweat from the torso, the heat from the ribs, and the friction created by breath and movement. A corset might be aired out overnight, hung near a window, or placed briefly in sunlight, but it was rarely washed. Water risked warping the boning or weakening the stitching, and the garment was too essential to risk damage. Because of this, corsets retained a complicated mixture of perfume and body odor that deepened with each passing day. Women accepted this reality with quiet resignation, knowing the garment's purpose outweighed its cleanliness. Dresses followed a similar fate. Many were made of fabrics that reacted poorly to water, or required specialized care that most households could not afford or perform regularly. Instead of laundering a dress, women refreshed it by spraying perfume onto the fabric, focusing on the areas most exposed to scent: sleeves, bodices, hems, and folds around the waist. The goal was not to remove what clung to the fabric, but to overwhelm it with something more pleasant. This approach created a layered aroma that shifted as the garment warmed with use. Some women had specific routines for reviving clothing that had already been worn for several days in a row. They brushed the fabric lightly, shook out dust, aired the layers, and added powders or fragrant oils to strategic places. They pressed scented cloths against the lining, allowing the fragrance to transfer slowly. These practices transformed garments into objects that held multiple days of accumulated scent part, memory part, necessity. A dress might smell fresh at a glance, but anyone who stood close enough could detect the complexity beneath. Wearing the same outfit repeatedly was not unusual. For many women, especially those without large wardrobes, a single dress served for an entire week. The scent changed each day, shaped by new applications of perfume mixed with the remains of the previous days. By the time the garment was removed at night, it held a concentration of fragrance and heat that spoke to the weight of daily life. This layering did not go unnoticed. Women learned to navigate it with quiet patience, understanding that the illusion of cleanliness mattered more than the reality behind it. Corsets carried an even heavier burden. The friction between the garment and the skin created warm enclosed spaces where odor developed quickly. Since corsets could not be washed frequently, their scent deepened with each tightening. Women recognized the moment when a corset needed refreshment, not washing. They discreetly added perfume along the seams and laces, pressing carefully to avoid staining the fabric. These gestures became routine, part of the unspoken ritual, designed to maintain an outward sense of refinement. Over time, garments became repositories of scent that revealed more truth than anyone cared to admit. The mixture of perfume, dust, sweat, and powdered fabric formed a distinct identity, rich, layered, and unmistakably lived in. This identity clung to clothing long after the wearer removed it. A dress folded neatly in a wardrobe still held the memory of its wearer's movements, while a corset hung on a hook retained the warmth of the body it once enclosed. Servants often managed these garments with quiet efficiency. They understood how scent lodged into fabric and how to soften the heaviness without drawing attention to it. They aired dresses at dawn, brushed off visible debris, and sprayed perfume lightly to avoid creating overpowering combinations. Their work maintained the balance between freshness and concealment, allowing women to appear composed despite the limitations of their hygiene routines. To many observers, the appearance of freshness mattered far more than the truth beneath it. Clothing that smelled clean, even if it was not allowed women to participate in social gatherings, attend dinners, and move through public space without drawing unwanted scrutiny. Perfume became the unspoken mediator between expectation and reality, covering the signs of prolonged wear without erasing them fully. This reliance on scent over cleanliness shaped how women understood their own bodies. They accepted that odor would linger, that garments would carry traces of daily life, and that perfume would form a protective layer between themselves and society. It was not a matter of neglect, but of practicality, cultural belief, and limited access to frequent washing. Clothing became both shield and container, holding the private reality of the body within tightly woven fibers. The practice of reviving unwashed garments created a cycle that repeated daily heat, scent, concealment, and renewal. By masking what could not be removed, women maintained the appearance that was demanded of them. Their clothing bore silent witness to this effort, capturing every trace of the body while offering no judgment. It was a system built on compromise, carried out with precision, and accepted as the natural order of things. In the end, garments served not only as fashion, but as evidence of the struggle between hygiene and expectation. They retained what society preferred to ignore, wrapped in layers of fragrance thick enough to present an illusion of refinement. Women managed these tensions with quiet endurance, trusting perfume to shield them from scrutiny, while their clothing held the truth beneath. Layers of fragrance rested on fabric that had absorbed far more than elegance through repeated wear. Every attempt to refresh those garments revealed how scent became a substitute for the cleanliness women could not access. Another quiet method soon appeared, relying on floral blends meant to bury the odor that never truly went away. Attempts to cover odor with floral blends shaped an entire routine that many women relied on each morning. They reached for lilac, lavender, or rosewater, as if these scents could erase what their bodies carried after days without bathing. Each fragrance was chosen carefully, measured not by preference, but by how well it could compete with sweat trapped under corsets, fabric, and the heavy air inside crowded rooms. The act looked delicate from afar. A graceful hand lifting a small bottle, a soft mist falling onto skin or cloth. Up close, it was nothing more than a fight against an odor that never stopped returning. There was no luxury in it, only the need to appear composed in a world that judged women by scent long before it judged them by character. Lilac was often selected for its sweetness. Women believed its gentle profile could soften the sharpness rising from unwashed skin. The fragrance drifted lightly when first applied, almost convincing in its brightness. But as the day warmed and bodies moved beneath the heat of multiple garments, lilac merged with sweat in a way that felt heavy rather than fresh. Lavender promised calm and purity, so it became a favorite among those who wanted to present themselves as serene. Yet lavender too fell into the same pattern. Once caught by the fabric lining a dress, it mixed with stale moisture and created a new kind of heaviness, neither floral nor clean. Rosewater, prized for its softness, seemed like a solution at first. Its familiarity offered comfort, a symbol of refinement. But even this scent struggled against the reality of bodies that never touched water, corsets worn for weeks, and fabrics pressed tightly against warm skin. The floral scents were rarely used alone. Women layered them, intentionally believing that a stronger arrangement could suppress what lay underneath. A morning routine often involved dabbing wrist, neck, and hair with light floral notes, then applying a denser mixture across areas where heat gathered most. These techniques were taught among women, shared quietly, as if they were passing down a secret essential to survival. The layering looked like elegance to observers, but it was a practiced defense against shame and scrutiny. The heavier the blend, the more likely it was that someone had tried to hide a stronger odor beneath it. The result was a scent profile that seemed refined from a distance, but revealed something different up close. Lilac combined with lavender. Lavender combined with rose. Rose combined with the faint bitterness of sweat that had nowhere to escape. The fragrances merged into a thick, muted cloud, trapped between layers of cloth. Each layer reflected effort, fear, and resignation. Women did not choose these scents because they wanted to smell luxurious. They chose them because their society demanded constant presentation, without offering the means to maintain real cleanliness. Events with many guests made the struggle more apparent. A drawing room filled with warm bodies quickly became a place where scents mingled unpredictably. Perfume drifted through the air, carrying traces of floral sweetness. But within that sweetness was something else: heat, dampness, and the remains of days-old perspiration that had never been washed away. Women stood side by side, each surrounded by her own blend of fragrance. When they curtsied, the movement stirred the trapped air beneath their garments. The floral notes rose again, accompanied by a softness that was not entirely floral. Those who noticed rarely reacted openly. They understood the silent agreement that held the system together. No one spoke of body odor, and no one admitted they lacked the conditions to prevent it. The illusion of refinement mattered more than truth. Society expected women to maintain a scented presence no matter the cost. This expectation grew heavier when they wore more elaborate fashions, attended longer gatherings, or lived in houses without enough water for proper bathing. Floral fragrances were not purchased for enjoyment. They were purchased for necessity. The need to hide any sign of physical reality overtook the possibility of comfort. A woman who smelled too natural risked embarrassment. A woman who smelled too floral raised questions. She had to find a balance between both extremes, though neither ever removed the core issue. Over time, the scents became signatures. People began recognizing others by the blends they used most often. A combination of lilac and rose signaled one personality. Lavender with musk signaled another. But these signatures were accidental. They formed because women relied so heavily on specific mixtures that the mixtures lingered on their clothes, furniture, and belongings. A chair could carry someone's scent long after she left. A glove retained fragrance and sweat so deeply that it revealed weeks of wear. These remnants turned every object into a record of a person's daily struggle with scent hygiene and expectation. Men noticed more than they admitted. They understood that a woman who smelled strongly of flowers had tried to hide something stronger. They recognized which blends indicated a lack of bathing, and which blends suggested a recent attempt to refresh. Yet silence persisted, reinforced by etiquette. It was improper to comment on a woman's scent unless it was praise. Anything else would break the fragile illusion everyone depended on. Each floral blend represented an effort to hide what life refused to erase. Clean water was scarce. Bathing was restricted. Clothing trapped heat. Society punished any sign of imperfection. Floral scents were not chosen to create beauty. They were chosen to disguise discomfort. Women carried these scents like armor, hoping the illusion would hold long enough to get them through another day without shame. Heavy floral blends created a fragile shell that covered more discomfort than refinement. Each added layer revealed how much pressure women faced to appear clean without ever being allowed true cleanliness. A deeper look into their social rituals soon exposes how every gathering turned fragrance into a tool for survival. A ballroom, filled with bright lamps and polished floors, looked elegant to anyone standing at the entrance. Yet those who stepped inside quickly learned that the appearance of refinement carried another reality beneath it. Warm bodies gathered shoulder to shoulder, moving under layers of fabric that trapped heat, moisture, and scent from the first hour of the event. Women who had prepared themselves carefully before leaving home, layering floral perfumes, refreshing their garments, adjusting their hair, found that the effort weakened the moment the room filled with people. The mixture rising in the air belonged to no single person. It was a collective presence, shaped by perfume, sweat, breath, and cloth that had not been washed recently. The warmth of the dancing floor invited motion, but it also awakened every scent caught beneath corsets and heavy skirts. Perfume drifted through the room in uneven waves. Some women arrived wearing strong floral blends, meant to overpower everything else. Their scents were sharp at first, noticeable, even before they reached the edge of the crowd. But floral notes did not float independently for long. As the room warmed, rose water mingled with lavender, lavender mingled with lilac, and the gentle sweetness, once meant to mask odor, transformed into something thicker and harder to name. The air, heavy with warmth, carried everything upward. Men adjusted their collars as beads of sweat formed beneath layers of wool. Women fanned themselves delicately, hoping the gesture would draw in a breath that felt clean. Each breath tasted faintly of perfume mixed with the unmistakable bitterness of heat trapped under fabric. The floors of ballrooms were designed for movement, yet movement itself created the conditions that made the scent more intense. A simple turn during a dance lifted the air beneath a skirt just enough to release everything it had trapped. A slow glide across the room stirred the perfume from a woman's gloves or sleeves. Small gestures, such as adjusting a strand of hair or lifting a handkerchief, carried scent through the room. Every motion became a reminder of how tightly controlled personal presentation had to be. No misstep, no sudden gesture, no hint of discomfort. Even those who felt overwhelmed by the density of the air were expected to maintain their composure. A single sign of unease could quickly be interpreted as a lack of refinement. In the midst of the room where the crowd was thickest, the air was at its most complex. The warmth created pockets of scent that hovered above the moving bodies. The floral perfumes blended with something unmistakably human moisture, from skin that had not touched clean water for days. Fabric stiff with repeated wear, and the heat trapped beneath corsets that never loosened during the night. Guests inhaled all of it, as they tried to smile politely, nod at acquaintances, and join the flow of polite conversation. Eyes glistened with the effort to remain composed. The air felt warm against the face, almost damp. Even those who came prepared for the discomfort felt the heaviness settling against their skin. The sound of music added to the illusion of elegance. Violins and pianos filled the room with harmony, masking the difficulty guests faced in every breath. The music danced above the scent, giving the evening a polished glow. But beneath the melody was the quiet struggle shared by every person in the room. Women fanned themselves harder as the evening continued, though the gesture did little beyond stirring the same heavy air onto their faces. Men loosened their posture slightly, stepping away from the densest areas when they felt overwhelmed. Yet leaving the ballroom entirely was rarely considered appropriate. Guests stayed endured and pretended not to notice the growing tension around them. The wealthiest women often seemed the most composed, not because they were unaffected, but because they had access to stronger perfumes. Their fragrances lasted longer, held more intensity, and layered more effectively over sweat and fabric. Their gowns, though equally heavy, were often better maintained with powders and scented sachets. These advantages made their presence appear more polished, reinforcing the idea that endurance in such an environment was a mark of status. Those with fewer resources struggled more. Their perfume faded early, leaving them vulnerable to the scrutiny of others. They stood near windows when possible, hoping the cooler air would help, though the slight breeze often did little. The true difficulty of these events revealed itself as the night progressed. The combined scents grew stronger with each hour. Those who entered late could feel the difference immediately. Their first breath inside the room carried the full mixture: floral sweetness, human warmth, stale moisture, and the scent of fabric worn too many times. It was a layered presence, shifting slightly with each movement of the crowd, but never dispersing. The longer the event lasted, the thicker the air became. For many guests, enduring the night was a performance requiring patience, discipline, and the ability to hide discomfort beneath polite smiles. Where social expectations were strict, honesty had no place. Guests did not complain, did not admit to discomfort, and did not acknowledge the scent that filled the room. To mention it openly would have broken the illusion that the event was refined. It would have suggested that the people gathered inside were as human as anyone outside the ballroom. The silence preserved the image society valued most: a world of elegance, grace, and composure, held together by ritual and pretense. Behind the silence, however, every person in the room felt the weight of the air pressing against their skin. The effort to endure these gatherings revealed a truth few wanted to confront. The beauty of the ballroom rested on layers of discomfort that guests were expected to tolerate without question. The more elaborate the event, the heavier the scent became. People admired the candles, the music, the polished dance floor, yet avoided acknowledging what hung in the air. For many, attending such events was a test not of social grace but of physical endurance. The ones who managed it best were often those with the strongest perfumes and the strongest tolerance. Warm currents inside the ballroom carried floral notes mixed with human scent, until the night felt shaped by discomfort as much as elegance. Each breath guests took revealed how fragile the polished image remained beneath layers of fabric and fragrance. Private rituals soon emerge, showing how women lived under the same pressure, even on quiet days, with no grand gathering to attend. Women facing their monthly bleeding lived under rules that shaped their routines and restricted their bodies in ways few modern readers would expect. Water, which should have offered relief from discomfort and helped them feel clean, was treated with caution whenever their cycles began. Some believed that bathing during this time weakened the body, caused fainting, or invited illness. Others repeated old warnings passed down by family or neighbors, insisting that exposure to water could disrupt the balance of a woman's health. As a result, many stayed away from baths, entirely waiting for the days to pass, while relying on whatever tools they had to remain presentable. The pressure to appear composed in public did not pause simply because their bodies were in pain. Staying dry meant accepting the discomfort that came with limited cleaning. Women wiped their bodies gently with scented cloths, hoping the quick gesture would help them feel steady enough to dress. Heat increased beneath the layers of fabric, especially around the waist and thighs where tension gathered. Some women carried cramps with a quiet endurance, walking with careful steps that made their movements appear graceful rather than strained. They rarely spoke of the pain, knowing silence was part of maintaining the image expected of them. Even at home, the discomfort could not be openly acknowledged. Maintaining dignity mattered more than admitting vulnerability. Perfume played an even larger role during these days. Bottles stood ready on dressing tables, placed beside powders that clung to skin and masked whatever scent emerged from the body. Women dabbed perfumes behind their ears, along the collarbone, and between folds of their clothing. The ritual took longer than usual because they needed the scent to last through hours spent in warm rooms, surrounded by others who could easily judge any sign of imperfection. The pressure to hide every trace of bodily change made the routine feel more like preparation for inspection rather than a simple moment of grooming. Each layer of fragrance settled onto a body denied the comfort of water. There was little room for rest. Even when bleeding made them weak or lightheaded, events continued. Invitations to gatherings or dinners required attendance, especially for women from respectable families. Declining without a convincing reason risked gossip, and gossip could spread faster than the truth. Many women forced themselves to rise from bed, dress in heavy layers, and sit through evenings filled with conversation that demanded alertness. They kept their posture upright despite the tension in their stomachs. Their hands rested in their laps or held fans with a steady grip. It was essential to appear unfazed. The layers of skirts, corsets, and undergarments made the challenge even greater. The tight compression around the abdomen pressed directly against cramping muscles. The heat trapped within the fabric intensified any existing discomfort. Movement became a delicate calculation. Each step, each shift of weight, each rotation of the torso had to be measured to avoid revealing strain. The slightest wince could draw unwanted attention. The pressure to remain controlled turned normal bodily pain into a private battle fought beneath silk and lace. Women used powders to absorb moisture along the thighs and lower back. These powders, scented with rose or lavender, stuck to the skin and created a dry surface beneath the layers of fabric. Powders were sometimes reapplied during the day, leaving a fine residue that gathered in the seams of undergarments. The fragrance mixed with the natural warmth of the body, creating an aroma intended to imply cleanliness, even when no water had touched the skin for days. These measures were imperfect, but they were among the few options available to women who wished to avoid scrutiny. Some women wore small sachets sewn into their clothing. These sachets held dried flowers or crushed herbs, releasing fragrance slowly as they moved. The scent was meant to blend with their perfume, creating a consistent aroma that followed them throughout the day. The sachets absorbed moisture as well, though only for a limited time. Once saturated, they needed to be replaced, leaving women dependent on the availability of materials and the assistance of their servants. The smell was sometimes inconsistent, sweet in some areas, sharp in others, and faintly unpleasant if mixed with too much heat. Even so, it was considered better than revealing the truth. Attending social gatherings during this time required careful emotional control. Women sat still, even when cramps tightened their abdomen. They breathed through discomfort while offering polite smiles. Their hands remained steady as they held teacups or touched gloves to their lips in small gestures of etiquette. Their presence in these gatherings was less about enjoyment and more about maintaining social expectations. They could not show how heavy their bodies felt beneath their layers of clothing. Decorative appearance mattered more than physical well-being. The complex relationship between perfume and pain shaped the way women navigated their world. They relied on scent to hide the parts of themselves that society rejected. They learned to silence their bodies, to be accepted using fragrance as a mask in moments when water was forbidden. Their daily routines became negotiations between endurance and presentation, survival and decorum. The rituals they followed created the illusion of refinement, even when the reality beneath their garments told a different story. The pressure to appear pure extended into private spaces. Women maintained composure in their bedrooms as carefully as they did in public rooms. They changed clothes, discreetly powdered themselves in silence, and tried not to reveal fatigue to those around them. Servants who assisted them learned to anticipate their needs without asking questions. The silence between them protected dignity, though it also reinforced the idea that natural bodily processes were unmentionable. Shame lingered in the smallest gestures. As the days passed, the scent layered on their skin grew stronger. Each morning required new applications of powder and perfume. Each evening left them exhausted. They longed for water, cool water, to rinse their bodies, warm water to ease their pain, but they waited until the rules allowed it. When the moment finally arrived, the act of bathing felt like stepping into relief, washing away days of discomfort and fragrant disguise. Thick layers of scent gathered on bodies denied the comfort of water, shaping each movement and gesture during days already filled with strain. Every effort to appear composed revealed how deeply women were bound by expectations that ignored their physical reality. Quiet routines in dim rooms soon hint at the heavy emotional weight carried long after the perfume fades. Women learned early that their worth in society depended not only on what they wore or how they behaved, but also on the scent that followed them into every room. A single trace of body odor, however faint, however natural, could shift how others looked at them. The judgment did not come from men alone. It often came from other women, spoken through glances rather than words. A raised eyebrow, a slight turn of the head, a pause before offering a greeting. These were the signs of silent condemnation. In this world, scent became a language of its own, one that measured purity, discipline, and social grace. Women monitored each other constantly, watching for the smallest flaw in an appearance, carefully built each morning. Perfume was less a luxury and more a shield. Women carried it as a necessity, knowing that leaving the house without fragrance would be interpreted as a failure of character. If a woman did not smell of flowers, powder, or clean linen, others assumed she lacked refinement. Natural scent was considered a sign of weakness or moral neglect. The absence of perfume suggested a lack of discipline, even a lack of decency. The idea that a woman's fragrance defined her worth reached deep into their daily routines. Every action connected to scent, applying perfume, refreshing a gown, adjusting gloves, served as a means to avoid humiliation. No one admitted this openly. Conversations about hygiene rarely touched on the truth. Women did not say, "I cannot afford perfume," or "I have not bathed this week," or "My clothes are too worn to hold any fragrance." Instead, they maintained a careful distance from topics that could expose vulnerability. Silence kept them safe. It also kept the expectations intact. The social pressure surrounding scent shaped every gathering, every visit, every polite exchange. Women carried the weight of this pressure in their movements, their posture, and their carefully controlled breathing. Inside, drawing rooms filled with soft light and polite conversation, scent drifted between guests just as much as voices did. Floral notes identified the wealthy who could afford stronger blends. Lighter fragrances marked those of modest means, who stretched small bottles as far as they could. The absence of scent, a rare and dangerous condition, drew attention immediately. Women noticed it before they noticed faces. They learned to scan the air around them the way others scanned clothing. Scent became a silent ranking system that required constant maintenance. The judgment extended beyond social gatherings. At home, women felt pressure from mothers, sisters, and relatives. Families taught young girls to view scent as an extension of morality. A girl who smelled clean was praised for discipline. A girl who carried even a hint of body odor was scolded for carelessness. These early lessons shaped their adult routines, embedding a sense of fear around being perceived as anything less than perfectly perfumed. Even when alone, many women felt uneasy without fragrance. The fear lingered like an echo. The body itself became a battleground. Natural processes, sweat, heat, and fatigue were treated as flaws that needed constant correction. Women powdered their chest, their arms, their necks, and the insides of their elbows. They applied perfume behind the knees beneath layers of petticoats and along the edges of corsets where heat gathered most intensely. Even these measures were not always enough. Fabric absorbed scent faster than skin, trapping it within the folds of garments that could not be washed regularly. The longer a dress was worn, the more it held the truth women tried to hide. They developed rituals to manage this. Some hung their dresses near open windows at night, hoping fresh air would thin the odor. Others stored sachets of crushed herbs in drawers or beneath layers of clothing to disguise the scent trapped in the fabric. Many applied perfume directly to gloves, shawls, or hats, letting those items carry the fragrant burden. Each technique attempted to outmaneuver the judgment waiting outside their homes. Women learned to read humiliation in the faces of others. When a scent failed, judgment arrived swiftly. A whispered comment, a polite step backward, a sudden excuse to leave it all, communicated the same message. Women feared these moments deeply. Some avoided crowded rooms, others limited physical closeness during greetings. They knew that once someone suspected a woman carried body odor, the suspicion stayed, following her into future gatherings, even if she smelled strongly of perfume the next time. The fear influenced how they walked and how they stood. They kept their arms close to their bodies, minimizing the chance that movement would stir the air beneath their clothing. They hesitated to raise their hands or turn too quickly. Every gesture carried risk. They learned to breathe shallowly in crowds, hoping to avoid noticing their own scent. The anxiety followed them, constantly shaping their sense of self. Wealth offered some protection, but not absolute freedom. Even the most affluent women knew they were judged by the fragrance they carried. Their perfumes were stronger, more layered, designed to linger in hallways long after they passed. But a stronger scent also meant stronger expectations. If they ever failed to meet the standard, the fall in reputation was even harsher. Women of modest means watched them carefully, measuring their own efforts against those of the wealthy. The competition was silent, constant, and exhausting. In this world, scent became inseparable from identity. A woman could be kind, intelligent, graceful, or skilled, yet if she carried the faintest natural odor, everything else faded in the eyes of others. Her value collapsed into a single judgment. The shame associated with body odor was not simply about cleanliness. It was about social survival. Women internalized this shame. Many believed that failing to smell pleasant meant failing as a person. They avoided intimate conversations. They apologized unnecessarily for being near others. They hid their discomfort behind polite smiles. Each day required vigilance. The scent had to hold, the mask had to stay in place. The tragedy lay in how deeply these pressures shaped their thoughts. Instead of recognizing that their environment denied them clean water and washable clothes, women blamed themselves. They became their own harshest critics, replicating the same judgment society had taught them. The shame attached to scent left them feeling exposed, even when no one spoke a word. Silent expectations turned natural scent into a source of fear, shaping how women moved, behaved, and judged themselves. Each gesture they made revealed how deeply they carried the burden of appearing pure in a world that allowed little comfort. Private moments soon show how this pressure followed them into their homes, influencing even the products sold to them as salvation. Perfume sellers learned quickly that fragrance could be shaped into more than a product. It could be turned into an idea, a promise, a reflection of the purity women were told they must embody. Advertisements began to appear in newspapers, on small printed cards, or in the windows of shops that displayed delicate glass bottles with ornate labels. The marketing was gentle, poetic, and carefully crafted to avoid any mention of the truth. Companies presented perfume as the essence of feminine virtue, a phrase that implied innocence, grace, and quiet perfection. Women were encouraged to believe that the fragrance they wore said something profound about their souls. It was not simply a scent, it was a symbol of character. These advertisements whispered through society like soft music. They did not shout, they floated. The imagery often involved flowers, angels, and pure white fabric, all meant to evoke the sense that a perfumed woman was untouched by the harshness of daily life. Perfume was sold as a transformation. One drop could turn someone weary, unwashed, and overwhelmed into a vision of elegance. The message suggested that fragrance could lift a woman from the circumstances she lived in, even if those circumstances included polluted water, unwashed clothing, or the impossibility of bathing regularly. The truth that perfume served as a mask for bodies denied cleanliness was never mentioned. Sellers understood how deeply women feared judgment. Rather than acknowledging this fear, advertisements exploited it. They implied that fragrance was a moral expectation. If a woman smelled pleasant, she was worthy of admiration. If she did, not something must be wrong with her. This created a powerful cycle. Women felt pressure to smell refined, and advertisements offered the refinement they longed for, wrapped neatly in glass. Perfume became a tool not only for covering odor, but also for avoiding social punishment. The shame around natural scent ensured the success of the industry. Marketing also leaned into the romantic. Ads described perfume as though it were part of courtship, a subtle language between lovers. A woman wearing the right scent was portrayed as graceful and alluring. These suggestions made fragrance seem essential, not optional. The idea that perfume could strengthen a woman's social presence, or even her marriage prospects, encouraged buyers to prioritize it, regardless of cost. Many spent money they could not spare because the alternative, being perceived as lacking refinement, felt more dangerous than financial strain. Some companies used vague claims of health benefits. They suggested their fragrances purified the air around the wearer, making her environment cleaner. This was misleading, but effective. The illusion that perfume could protect women from disease or impurities made it even more attractive, especially in cities where sanitation was poor and illness spread easily. Perfume was presented as both beauty and safety, when in reality it offered neither. It hid the symptoms of unwashed bodies, but did nothing to change the conditions that made cleanliness difficult. Sellers never admitted that their most loyal customers were women who could not bathe. Instead, they pretended that perfume was simply a fashionable indulgence. Even the more honest manufacturers avoided acknowledging why their products sold so well. They spoke of elegance, never necessity. They spoke of refinement, never reality. They avoided discussing the daily challenges women faced, and instead framed perfume as a celebration of femininity. The gap between the fantasy of marketing and the truth of daily life grew wider with every advertisement. Women internalized these messages. They believed that wearing perfume was part of being dignified. They believed that applying fragrance each morning made them morally stronger. The connection between scent and virtue became so firm that many women could not imagine going outside without perfume, even if they had not bathed for days. They saw fragrance as an extension of their identity, shaped by expectations they did not choose. Marketing played on this vulnerability with precision. The advertisements rarely mentioned anything practical. They did not discuss how fragrance clung to sweat or fabric. They did not explain that perfume mixed with unwashed clothing could create a scent heavier and more complex than intended. They did not acknowledge that many women used perfume not to enhance their presence but to mask a burden. Instead, the ads offered gentle praise. They promised that a perfumed woman was pure, delicate, and graceful. They promised she would float through society without criticism. Behind these promises lay a quieter truth. Perfume companies knew exactly what they were selling, not beauty, not luxury, but escape. They offered the illusion of cleanliness to women who lacked access to it. They offered protection from judgment to those who feared humiliation. They offered a sweet-smelling veil over the harsh reality that water was scarce, soap was expensive, and hygiene, true hygiene, was often beyond reach. This gap between promise and reality was the foundation of their success. Even when reports began to circulate about unsanitary factories or questionable ingredients, most buyers ignored them. They preferred the comfort of the illusion. They wanted to believe the ads, because believing them meant avoiding the discomfort of acknowledging the truth. Social pressure made honesty difficult. Women who questioned perfume risked being seen as neglectful or unrefined. It was easier to trust the advertisements, to hold on to the belief that fragrance represented virtue. The deeper tragedy was not the deception itself, but how thoroughly it shaped women's understanding of themselves. Many began to believe that their natural bodies were unacceptable. They believed their worth was tied to their scent. They believed that without perfume they were lacking something essential. This belief followed them into adulthood, shaping their routines, their fears, and their sense of identity. The industry thrived on this insecurity. Bottle designs became more ornate. Scents grew stronger and more layered. Marketing evolved into a finely tuned system that spoke to women's emotions more than their needs. The messaging grew sweeter, even as the truth grew harder to face. Perfume sellers knew they were selling comfort, not cleanliness, and they knew that comfort was irresistible in a world where real relief was rare. Soft promises, wrapped in elegant bottles, encouraged women to hide their reality beneath layers of manufactured sweetness. Every advertisement reinforced the idea that fragrance could replace the cleanliness women were denied. Another uncomfortable truth soon emerges when looking at how deeply scent shaped fear, behavior, and reputation in daily life. Perfume bottles displayed on dressing tables looked delicate, beautiful, and intentionally crafted to suggest luxury, yet their purpose in daily life held a weight far heavier than their thin glass walls could show. Each one existed less as an ornament and more as a quiet confession, a silent admission that the woman who owned it had no reliable access to water, no safe place to bathe, and no social permission to appear in public without the illusion of cleanliness. The ritual of applying perfume was therefore not an indulgence, it was a requirement. Women dabbed fragrance along their necks, wrists, and the edges of their clothing with movements shaped by helpless necessity. Their bodies carried days of accumulated discomfort beneath their garments, and the bottle in front of them became the only tool they had to hide it. Many women applied perfume before speaking to anyone, as though scent were a form of armor that must be secured before stepping outside their rooms. They opened the bottle, carefully tilted it with practiced precision, and allowed a few drops to land on their skin. Even the soft sound of the liquid touching their pulse points offered a strange reassurance. It marked the beginning of the mask they needed to face the world. Their bodies might have gone untouched by water for days, but their scent had to remain pleasant. The expectation was ironclad, shaping how they prepared themselves from morning until night. Fragrance served as a substitute for relief. Where water could not reach, perfume took its place. Its sweetness hung in the air, overtaking the natural scent of skin held under layers of fabric. For some women, the smell of perfume became a reminder of what they could not have: a warm bath, a moment to breathe without fear of judgment, a sense of comfort that did not depend on covering what lay beneath. The scent clung to every space they entered, settling in hallways, on carriage seats, even on the hands of anyone who brushed against their clothing. People admired the fragrance without considering what had made it necessary. The smell of perfume mixed with bodies that had endured the heat and confinement of corsets, petticoats, and multiple layers of skirts. Beneath all those layers, sweat collected in quiet places, trapped by fabric that rarely touched water. Women felt the weight of their garments increasing with each passing hour. They adjusted their posture to prevent the fabric from revealing the scent that lingered underneath. When the air turned warm or crowded, their anxiety grew. The fear of being discovered, of someone detecting the truth beneath the perfume, shaped their movements and expressions. They applied more fragrance throughout the day, using whatever they had on hand. Small bottles hidden in reticules, scented powders folded into pockets, sachets sewn into hems. All were used to reinforce the illusion. Some tapped perfume behind their knees, or along the insides of their elbows, knowing heat would lift the scent upward as they moved. Others sprayed it directly onto fabric, allowing it to soak into the cloth and radiate outward. These practices were not intended to enhance beauty. They were desperate attempts to maintain dignity in a society that equated moral worth with personal scent. The pressure was constant. Women sat in parlors beside other guests who silently judged each other's fragrance. They walked past acquaintances who scanned their presence in a second, searching for signs of imperfection. They entered crowded rooms where perfume had to contend with heat-stale air and the odor of worn clothing. Their social survival depended on remaining fragrant despite the impossible conditions they lived in. Each scent became a message: I am trying. I am acceptable. I am still worthy. Wealthier women used stronger perfume, believing its intensity would protect them better than lighter blends. They chose scents designed to last longer, even when mixed with the warmth of unwashed skin. Their bottles were larger, their applications were heavier, and their choices were more varied. Yet even they carried the same underlying truth. Their perfume did not represent luxury. It represented confinement. It represented the inaccessible comfort of bathing. It represented the burden of appearing clean when their bodies had been denied the means to be so. For women of modest means, perfume was often their only defense. They could not rely on frequent garment changes or scented sachets placed throughout their wardrobes. Instead, they stretched small bottles for as long as possible, applying just enough to mask what they feared would be noticed. These women understood the stakes intimately. Without fragrance, they risked humiliation. Without fragrance, they risked being marked as careless or indecent. The single bottle they owned carried an emotional weight far heavier than the liquid inside. Society accepted this reality without question. People admired the appearance of refinement without acknowledging the desperation hidden beneath. Entire rooms, filled with fragrant women, were celebrated as elegant, dignified, and civilized. The truth that those same women lived without clean water, without breathable clothing, and without the freedom to exist naturally, remained unspoken. This silence allowed the illusion of fragrance to flourish. It strengthened the pressure to conform and preserved the expectation that women must carry their burden quietly. The scent that drifted through parlors, ballrooms, and carriages was therefore not a sign of luxury but a mark of survival. It was an attempt to protect personal dignity in an environment that denied women the basic conditions required for comfort. The sweetness of perfume masked not only body odor, but also fatigue, shame, and resignation. Women learned to endure the contradiction. Their society expected them to smell pure while living with the impossibility of being clean. Every bottle of perfume, no matter how ornate, held the weight of this contradiction. Behind its polished exterior, behind the delicate label, and the carefully chosen fragrance, lived the truth that women were forced to hide. They carried this truth on their skin, their clothing, and their breath. Perfume did not solve their struggle. It only softened it, shaping an acceptable exterior, while leaving the deeper problem untouched. Every scent drifting through their world revealed how fragrance served as a fragile shield, rather than a true reflection of comfort. Each bottle masked the harsh reality that women had to appear pure, despite lacking the means to feel clean. Quiet routines in private rooms soon show how fear shaped their daily habits far more than elegance ever did. Women carried a quiet tension each time they stepped outside their homes, a tension that never fully eased, no matter how carefully they prepared. The fear of being discovered, of having someone catch a trace of their natural scent beneath the layers of fragrance, sat in their minds with a weight that shaped how they moved, breathed, and interacted with others. They knew their bodies had not touched clean water for days. They knew their clothing held the warmth, moisture, and odor trapped beneath heavy fabric. And they knew society judged scent as harshly as it judged behavior. This fear made fragrance less of an accessory and more of a shield they depended on from morning until night. Small perfume bottles, hidden in pockets or tiny bags, became essential tools. Women reached for them instinctively throughout the day, applying quick touches of scent whenever they felt the slightest rise of heat. They learned to read their bodies like a warning system. A shift in temperature, the pressure of a crowded room, or even the simple act of walking up a flight of stairs signaled that their perfume might need reinforcement. These moments were quiet rituals carried out in corners, hallways, or private antechambers where other guests would not notice. The motions were practiced tilting the bottle, applying a small amount, and smoothing it gently onto the skin or fabric. Each gesture rebuilt the mask they wore. The fear of exposure spread into every interaction. Women hesitated to stand too close to others. They chose seats near windows or doors, where air movement might help disperse their scent. They adjusted their posture to keep their arms close, minimizing the stirring of air beneath their clothing. Every greeting, every polite conversation, every moment spent in company carried the tension of hoping no one noticed the truth hidden beneath the fragrance. They smiled, nodded, and exchanged kind words, yet behind their expressions lay constant calculation. Do I still smell acceptable? Is my perfume holding? Has the room grown too warm? Crowded gatherings heightened this fear. Ballrooms, parlors, and dinner parties created environments where warm bodies, heavy clothing, and stagnant air worked against the women who lived under strict expectations. As the hours passed, heat rose beneath layers of corsets and petticoats, carrying the risk of scent escaping. Women felt the danger rising with their body temperature. When they sensed even the smallest shift, they slipped away to reapply perfume, knowing that failing to do so could lead to humiliation. A single whispered comment, a small backward step from another guest, or a passing glance could shatter their composure. Shame spread faster than fragrance ever could. Some women anticipated this risk by layering fragrances strategically before leaving home. They applied floral scents near their face, stronger notes along the waist where heat gathered, and lighter powders near the hems of their skirts. They scented gloves, shawls, and even parasols to create multiple barriers between their bodies and the outside world. These layers were not expressions of personal style. They were defensive measures, arranged to prevent a moment of exposure. Women monitored themselves constantly, their thoughts consumed by maintaining control over something as fragile as scent. The emotional toll of this vigilance was heavy. Women carried guilt for feeling unclean, shame for lacking access to water, and fear of judgment from a society that refused to acknowledge the conditions it imposed on them. Even in the privacy of their rooms, they worried about how they would smell tomorrow, or how long their current bottle of perfume would last. They inspected their clothing, trying to determine whether the scent still held. They rarely felt at ease, even when alone. The anxiety followed them, from morning until night. The consequences of failure were not imaginary. Women who were suspected of carrying body odor faced immediate social consequences. Invitations decreased, conversations grew shorter, faces tightened with polite discomfort. Even family members could reinforce this judgment. Mothers lectured daughters, sisters exchanged concerned looks. The damage to a woman's reputation could linger long after the scent had faded. Fear kept women rigid, controlled, and relentlessly attentive to their fragrance. Servants played a silent role in this cycle. They recognized the signs of worry, offering perfume or fresh clothes without being asked. They understood the stakes better than most. They had seen women crumble into quiet distress after overhearing a whispered remark. They had watched them apply perfume with trembling hands. The servants' discreet assistance allowed their mistresses to maintain dignity, but it also reinforced the pressure to appear flawless. The unspoken truth, no one smelled clean because no one could bathe, remained buried beneath layers of politeness. Over time, the mask of fragrance became inseparable from a woman's identity. She could not imagine facing the world without it. She feared the vulnerability of being natural, of letting her body exist without concealment. Perfume was not simply a scent trailing behind her. It was a boundary that protected her from judgment, exclusion, and shame. It allowed her to function in a society that demanded more from her appearance than her comfort. The bottle she carried was both a tool and a burden. This dependence created a kind of quiet exhaustion. Each day required planning, vigilance, and repeated maintenance of the mask. Each evening brought the relief of stepping out of public spaces and letting the tension fall away. Yet even then, women rarely allowed themselves to feel entirely safe. The scent lingered in their rooms, on their pillows, and on their hands. It reminded them that tomorrow would require the same effort. There was no escape from the cycle. Scent clung to their lives as a fragile barrier, shaping how they moved, breathed, and allowed others near them. Every moment spent outside their homes revealed how deeply fear dictated their behavior beneath layers of fragrance. A deeper strain emerges when looking at how this anxiety eroded rest, confidence, and peace long before the day was done. Women learned to live inside their own minds with a kind of tension that rarely eased attention, shaped not by danger or misfortune, but by the constant fear of the scent their bodies might reveal. The world around them expected perfection, soft floral fragrance, gentle sweetness, a trace of purity that followed them into every hallway and room. Yet beneath their clothing, beneath powdered skin and layers of carefully applied perfume, they carried the truth their bodies had not touched clean water in days. This truth pressed into their thoughts, especially at night when the world fell quiet and there was no distraction from the anxieties that followed them home. Sleep often arrived slowly, if at all. Many women lie in their beds, fully aware of the scent trapped on their skin and in the fabric around them. They tried to settle into comfortable positions, but the heaviness of their garments lingered in memory even after they were removed. The scent of perfume layered heavily throughout the day, clung to their hair, their hands, their pillows. Each breath reminded them of how hard they had worked to remain acceptable. Instead of bringing calm nighttime, allowed their fears to surface. They wondered whether others had noticed something they had missed. They replayed conversations, greetings, shared moments, searching for signs of judgment, hidden inside a glance or a polite smile. This worry shaped how they saw themselves. A woman who feared she smelled unpleasant began to view her body as something unreliable, something capable of betraying her at any moment. She moved with caution even in her own room, adjusting her posture through habit, touching her wrists or neck, where perfume usually rested. Some sat in silence before bed, pressing small sachets of herbs against their skin in a gesture that brought no real comfort. Others reapplied perfume even after undressing, unable to tolerate the idea of being unmasked for even a moment. These rituals were not about beauty, they were anchored in fear. During the day, women carried this anxiety like a weight in their stomachs. The thought that they might smell wrong followed them into every interaction. They avoided leaning too close during conversations. They stepped back subtly during greetings. They held themselves upright with a stiffness that came not from pride but from apprehension. This constant vigilance created an emotional exhaustion that few could admit. Women were expected to remain graceful, composed, and pleasant even as their minds churned with doubts. If they showed signs of distress, others assumed it reflected weakness rather than the pressure placed upon them. Self-doubt spread quietly through their routines. A woman might question whether her perfume had faded too quickly. She might wonder if the heat beneath her clothing had lifted a scent others could detect. She might worry that a moment of laughter or a small gesture had stirred the air around her in a way that exposed her natural odor. These thoughts repeated themselves throughout the day, growing sharper in crowded rooms and during gatherings where warm air and proximity heightened the risk. The anticipation of failure became as heavy as the clothing she wore. Silence intensified the burden. Women were taught that complaining about these fears was improper. They were expected to hide discomfort behind gentle expressions and polite conversation. They could not admit that they felt unclean, that they feared being judged, or that the scent on their skin made them anxious. Even within their families, the subject felt forbidden. Mothers instructed daughters to maintain composure. Sisters exchanged concerned looks but rarely spoke openly. Servants noticed their unease yet responded only with small gestures, offering perfume, adjusting clothing, and refreshing linens without acknowledging the deeper truth. This unspoken rule kept women trapped inside their own thoughts. The lack of open conversation meant each woman believed she struggled alone. She assumed other women remained effortlessly fragrant, effortlessly composed, effortlessly perfect. She compared herself to an illusion crafted by society, never realizing that the women around her carried the same fears. This isolation deepened her anxiety. She tried harder, applied more perfume, tightened her control over her movements, all in an attempt to match a standard that was never real to begin with. The more she tried, the heavier the burden became. Night brought no relief. Some women woke suddenly, believing they detected their own odor in the still air. They sat upright, touched their clothing, or reached for a bottle of perfume kept near the bed. The darkness made their fears sharper. Without the distractions of daily life, every worry felt larger. They imagined the scent seeping into their bedding, or lingering in the corners of the room. They imagined others discovering their secret. In these moments, their thoughts spiraled into self-criticism, shaped by the belief that failing to maintain a pleasant fragrance reflected a deeper flaw in their character. Women often felt shame for feeling this way. They questioned why something as simple as scent controlled their emotions so completely. They did not recognize that society had tied identity to fragrance so tightly that stepping outside without perfume felt dangerous. The expectation was so ingrained that women internalized it long before adulthood. Even when exhausted, they continued to hold themselves accountable, to a standard that brought them no comfort. Over time, the emotional weight settled into their bodies. Shoulders held tension, breathing remained shallow. Movements felt careful rather than natural. The burden of scent shaped them physically as well as mentally. Women learned to navigate the world in a way that concealed their vulnerability. This concealment became habit, then instinct, then identity. The cycle repeated day after day, uninterrupted, because no one acknowledged it. The mask had to remain intact. This burden followed women through every stage of life. Younger women feared judgment from their peers. Older women feared accusations of losing their refinement. Mothers feared setting a poor example for their daughters. The anxiety did not fade with age. It evolved. Yet no matter how carefully they tried to maintain their mask, they never felt entirely at ease. The fear lived beneath their perfume, beneath their clothing, beneath their smiles. Layers of fragrance covered bodies that carried silent worry, far heavier than their garments. Every attempt to maintain composure revealed how deeply scent shaped their thoughts, rest, and sense of self. Another truth soon emerges when looking at what happened once these women returned to their rooms exhausted, but unable to escape the cycle. Somewhere in the dim corner of a Victorian bedroom, where a single candle burns low and softens the edges of every object, it touches the truth of perfume settles more honestly than it ever could. Beneath chandeliers or inside crowded halls, this is the hour when a woman removes her gloves, loosens the laces of her corset, and finally lets her shoulders fall from the posture she has held since morning. Her body, stiff from long hours of restraint, remembers every controlled breath, every careful movement, every moment of silence she carried through the day. The fragrance rising from her skin lingers heavier, now clinging to the fabric draped over the chair, the faded quilt on her bed, the air around her. In this quiet room, the purpose of perfume grows clearer than any advertisement ever claimed. It was not a luxury. It was survival. What appeared delicate earlier now feels mournful, a quiet echo of a life lived without access to water, rest, or relief. The sweetness of rose and the softness of lavender cannot hide the fatigue that settles along her ribcage. The warmth trapped beneath layers of fabric, the weight of expectation pressing along her back. Perfume was crafted not to elevate her, but to erase the truth of her condition. When she lies down, the scent is the one thing left standing between her and everything she was told to conceal. Perfume was never the emblem of refinement. It was a whispered plea for dignity. A woman wore it not because she adored its floral notes, but because society granted her no other path to appear acceptable. Days passed without bathing, yet she had to smile. Hours spent inside heavy skirts left her skin damp and warm, yet she had to appear fresh. Each instruction reinforced a single message. Her comfort was irrelevant. Only the illusion mattered. The body beneath her clothing was incidental. The fragrance was the performance. Late at night, when she touches her own skin, she feels the thin crust of dried perfume along her wrists and the powder thickening in the folds of her elbows. She feels the faint layer of sweat beneath her neckline, the uneven texture of skin that has been pressed beneath fabric since dawn. The cloth she uses to wipe her arm does not lift the scent. It spreads it, revealing how deeply it has settled into her pores. These private moments are the only time she acknowledges the discomfort she is forbidden to name. Her dress reveals the same truth. Draped on the chair, it no longer smells like flowers. It carries the scent of every room she passed through, every warm corridor, every crowded ballroom. The inner lining is dusted with powder. The hem is heavy in places where moisture has gathered. When she lifts the skirt, the air beneath it rises a mix of perfume, sweat, and trapped warmth. It is not offensive. It is human. Yet humanity was the very thing she was taught to hide. The emotional residue is heavier still. She replays fragments of the day. A glance from another woman, a polite nod, a moment of quiet near a doorway. She wonders whether her perfume was strong enough, whether she reapplied at the right times, and whether the scent held beneath the ballroom heat. Even lying alone in her room, she cannot shake the anxiety of being discovered. Society trained her to fear her natural scent more than exhaustion, more than discomfort, more than sickness. Perfume companies sharpened this fear. They promised purity, grace, virtue, but what they sold was escape. They offered bottled hope to women who were denied basic care. Their advertisements urged women to equate fragrance with moral value. Buying perfume became a necessity, not a luxury. Wearing it became a form of social armor, and society applauded the illusion. Rooms filled with perfumed women were praised as elegant. No one questioned why the fragrance was needed. No one asked about the lives underneath. A woman smelling of flowers was respectable. A woman smelling like herself was unacceptable. This quiet cruelty shaped the rhythm of her days. When a woman uses perfume to mask her body year after year, she begins to detach from herself. She learns to distrust her natural scent, to treat her comfort as secondary, to hide her physical reality. She learns that her body is not hers, to understand only hers to correct. The fragrance becomes part of her identity, not because she loves it, but because she fears who she is without it. In the stillness of night, when she closes her eyes, the scent remains soft, persistent, inescapable. It floats above her, like the memory of all she endured. It does not comfort her. It does not soothe her. It simply exists, hovering in the dark, reminding her of a world that demanded perfection from a body it refused to care for. When she breathes out, the fragrance moves with her exhale, settling into the quiet room like dust. This is the truth behind the sweetness. Perfume was never meant for seduction. It was meant for shielding. It disguised a reality no one wanted to confront. The final image left behind is not glamour, nor beauty, nor elegance. It is a woman lying alone in a dim bedroom, carrying the invisible weight of expectations that shaped her entire life. What lingers is not a memory of charm, but the faint, fading trace of a fragrance covering a body that deserved gentleness instead of concealment. Thank you for staying through this quiet, heavy journey. May your night be calm, may your thoughts soften, and may rest find you easily. Good night.